afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of the Borough Council. Could I ask you to please remain standing while we say prayers?
Let us pray for all who are called to serve in government. Guide, we pray, O Lord our God, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, all ministers of the Crown, all members of the House of Commons, all peers of the realm. And we humbly beseech you, this Mayor, the councillors, executive and officers of our Borough of Redcar and Cleveland, that in the power of your Holy Spirit, all those whom you have called to public service may be blessed with wisdom and right judgment in all things. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
A prayer for our borough. Almighty God, the maker and ruler of all things, we humbly beseech you to bless and prosper the people of this borough of Redcar and Cleveland. Strengthen our commerce, sustain our industries, nourish our agriculture, strengthen and sustain our communities, bless the work of all our charities, uphold and support our children, and prosper all places of learning, that our borough of Redcar and Cleveland may truly be a place where all generations flourish. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
May God grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the Church, to the Queen, to the Commonwealth, and to all people unity, peace and concord, and to us and to all God's servants life everlasting. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and your council. Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. Before we start, can I ask, if you have a mobile phone, can you either switch it off or to silent, please? First item of business is to receive apologies for absence.
Me first, or you first? Councillor McCluskey, Councillor Quartermain, Councillor Furman, Councillor Quigley, Councillor Stainthorpe, Councillor Dennis. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Councillors Wright, Dowson and Harding, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. I understand Councillor Cooney, Councillor Mrs. Cooney's also sent her apologies. Okay. Any more apologies? Okay, thank you. Item 2 is declarations of interest. There should be forms going around the chamber. Item 3 is to confirm the accuracy of the previous meetings held on the 14th and 28th of February.
Move both sets of minutes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Okay. All in favour? Thank you. Item 4 is to receive announcements. I have one announcement, and that is that my charity ball will be taking place on Thursday, the 25th of April at Gisborough Hall. I do hope as many members that are able will be able to attend that. Can I ask, if you are not able to attend, could you please provide a prize for the raffle or the tombola? That would be very much appreciated. Any announcements from the leader?
Mayor, does that mean we have to wear our frocks to the council meeting?
Wear your
have frocks for the ball to the council meeting?
Ladies can come dressed as they wish.
Yeah. So there you go, best frocks, right. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I've just got a few things that I want to say today. First of all, spring statement from the Chancellor. I forgive anybody who missed it because it wasn't particularly exciting. In fact, it was a bit of a damp squib, I think it would say, and I'm not being political in saying that. I think all the commentators said that. Basically, we obviously, against our backdrop of a spending power cut of 35% since 2010, there was absolutely nothing in the spring statement to deal with the funding gap that we have in relation to local services. You will know that nationally, local government has a funding gap of £3 billion. Also, disappointingly, because we've got to plan for the future, and we did our budget last time, and we all know that that budget is pretty precarious for the coming year, and if we have any big demand issues, or if there's any problems in relation to the income we're collecting around business rates, for example, and there's a lot of uncertainty around Brexit, what we aren't going to have is any certainty on future funding, because basically the arrangements for any future funding will be set out in the spending review, and whilst we were hoping that that would happen over the summer, that is not now going to happen, and we're not going to see the spending review happen until the autumn. So we are in a pretty precarious position in relation to funding, and all of us, everybody in this chamber, whatever their political party or none, we need to be lobbying government to ensure that that spending review actually genuinely provides the money that we need to provide the desperately needed council services that currently we're having to cut on a regular basis. And again, you know, this is something that cross-party is being supported through the LGA and other organisations. My second point, Mr. Mayor, is just about the South Tees Development Corporation. Most of you will be aware that we have used a chunk of local money from the Tees Valley Combined Authority to purchase a big chunk of the South Tees Development Corporation site. And work is going to start shortly, putting in a roundabout and some other infrastructure on one part of the site, ready to make it ready for investors, which is really good news. The other good news is that the CPO process, the compulsory purchase process for the remaining land, is about to get underway, which, although it's actually going to take a bit longer than we hoped, hopefully it's going to break the stalemate with the Thai banks, and we'll be able to move forward and get that land into ownership as well. Again, however, I have to say, the delay in the spending review is going to cause us some issues, because we obviously need to make a bid for funding to government to enable us to develop out that site. And again, we're not going to hear anything about whether or not that bid has been successful until the autumn. So it's this spending review thing is really, really important to us as an authority going forward. Couple more. Redcar and Cleveland College. Those of you who read the Cabinet papers will have seen that there was a very positive report about progress of Redcar and Cleveland College. It's been doing really well since merger, with a real growth in student numbers and a range of courses being put on that are significantly improved on what was there previously. That progress was tested last week. Ofsted were in. They were really pleased that Ofsted turned up to re-inspect them. And I was very pleased and keen to go and talk to the inspectors and say just how much, as a council, we appreciate the way that they are working in partnership with us now and helping us deliver a whole range of things. The outcome of that visit isn't available yet. That will be in the next couple of weeks. But I am very hopeful that it'll be a vindication of all the effort and hard work that's gone into saving Redcar and Cleveland College, and I think we should all be very proud that we still have that college there. A couple of other things, Coastal Communities Fund and other bidding. You'll know that we had a couple of bids into the Coastal Communities Fund, one for Redcar Station and one for the Arlington Co-op building in Loftus. When I say we, these are community-led bids that are led by the communities, Coastal Communities Partnerships. Sadly, the government chose to reject both of those bids, which is really disappointing for all the work that has gone into those particular projects. There are, however, plan Bs for both, and we're going to be working with the bid developers to actually see how we can still invest in those projects. And I just want to put on record a big thanks to the communities and the officers and everybody who was involved in putting those in. And in relation to Loftus, last Friday, we submitted our bid to the Future High Streets Fund, which is again another important project, and that was submitted last Friday, and we'll wait and see what comes from that. And we have now had a further announcement of another bidding round. You know, if we need all this money, why doesn't just government just give it us rather than make us bid for it all? But there's now something called the Stronger Towns Fund, which again we're going to be making an application to, although I haven't got any details of what that will look like yet. Finally, Mr. Mayor, just a couple of things. I do just want to say some thank yous to people for some great events that have happened in the last month. The Aspiring Women Awards, I don't know, few people here who were at that event. Absolutely fabulous to see a number of women across the borough recognised for the inspirational work that they do. The Shine event, which brought together all our community groups and activities. Mr. Mayor, you were at that as well. Again, another brilliant event. And of course, I was at an event organised by our business support team around social enterprise, and it was really good to see that growing as a sector in the borough. It's an important sector for our business space, and social enterprises are growing really well. And finally, I'd just like to say a really good luck to everyone who's going to be involved in the Klondike Grand Prix on the 14th of April. I hope the weather's good and it goes really well for you all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any announcements from Cabinet members?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great Smith Street is a grand old street round the corner from Westminster Abbey. And a year ago, I went there to the Department for Education to try and persuade the National Commissioner for Schools to do something urgently about one of our failing academies. But the week before last, I was in the same street on the other side of the road in Church House, in a much happier circumstance, at the Public Sector Transformation Awards, where we received the Bronze Award in the Community Focus - People category of the Public Sector Awards. It was given to our apprenticeship team, who have provided scores of young people with the opportunity to fulfill their potential with the skills needed to find employment and a prosperous future. We took on 93 apprentices in 2017-18, which exceeded our target of 74. We were the only council in the Tees Valley to achieve this. We believe we are the highest paying council in the country for apprenticeships, and our £5 per hour rate attracted more than 200 applications in a recent recruitment campaign. We take our social responsibility seriously. We have given an apprenticeship to 25 NEETs and ensure 10% apprenticeships each year go to our young people in care. We engage with schools and colleges, offering apprenticeships across all directorates and up to master's degree level. So I'd like to invite Vicky Smith, Hayley Howsam, Karen Codling and Joanne Walker to present the award to the Mayor. Would you come forward?
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. It's always very exciting to receive these awards. It shows that this council is heading in the right direction in a number of ways, despite all the problems that do exist, not just here but throughout the country. Now, very, very, very pleased that we've received this award, and thank you for presenting it, Councillor Hannaway. Any other Cabinet members wish to say anything? Okay. Item 5, which I've been told I can't ignore, as I did a couple of meetings ago, is announcements from the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's nice not to be ignored, but I haven't got any announcements today, thank you.
See, we do invite her and then she's not got anything to say. Okay. Item 6 is to consider questions from the public. We haven't received any questions, so we'll pass on to item 7. which is business from our last meeting, and that's to consider a motion. Councillor King, I understand you are proposing the motion. I confirm that Councillor Mason is seconding the motion. Okay, thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you. As you can see, the motion is quite a lengthy one, and it's quite an important one, so I'm not going to read the preamble to the motion. You've all got that, and hopefully you've all had a chance to read it in. But today's motion is about raising awareness of climate breakdown, as awareness will lead to action and make us look both locally, nationally and internationally as individuals and as global citizens as to the devastating consequences that would arise from denying this, burying our heads in the sand or simply doing nothing. An increase in floods, droughts and temperature increases will impact heavily on growing food, leading to famine, forced migrations, crisis or even civil war. This can only be stopped or controlled if we take immediate action. Evidence from the latest UN IPCC report shows the severity of the current situation, and even if emissions are halved in 12 years, temperatures are still likely to rise by 1.5%. Jess Madison's a local young person, and she's so worried about the future, she's helped to arrange demonstrations in the northeast as part of an international movement of young people who want action. And she told me, I initially got involved in the movement after becoming increasingly aware of the catastrophic consequences we as a planet would face if nothing was to be done about climate change. I feel that I and many other young people are so passionate about this issue, as it is us who will be robbed of our futures. It's our lives that will be ruined. It's paramount that people in positions of power open their eyes and start listening to young people. After all, while children may only be a small percentage of the present, we are 100% of the future, so our voices need to be heard and action must be taken. Think about your children and your children's children. Surely you'd want them to have the best possible chance. So thanks for Jess for sending that in. We must do all we can to protect our planet for current and future generations. We must look at and accept the scientific evidence around climate change and environmental breakdown and the possible devastating consequences, and we need to act now by leading by example. Something as simple as planting a tree is a great way to sequester carbon emissions. Through photosynthesis, trees absorb carbon dioxide to produce oxygen and wood. As a tree matures, it can consume 48 pounds of carbon dioxide per year as it turns to CO2 in parts of itself. It also releases enough oxygen to supply your needs for 2 years. These two simple effects help to give the Earth a healthier climate. We need to be a carbon neutral borough as soon as possible. We need the public, community groups, schools and all businesses to get behind a project to plant trees. We need to highlight all areas for planting in the borough, green areas, roadsides, parks and streets, and involve as many local organisations as we can to organise the planting so the cost is not passed on through council tax increases, as the biggest difference we can make towards combating climate change is via engagement rather than finances. Whilst addressing carbon neutrality for non-industrial activity, we need to look at industry. We have a lot of heavy industry in this area. If a forest of 450 acres was planted on brownfield land north of Redcar, within 10 years it would absorb enough carbon to neutralise the borough, whilst providing an area people would want to visit, provide opportunities for scientific study and outdoor pursuits, all positive for the health of local residents who will also be breathing cleaner air. So I ask for you to support the motion today, please, and ensure that this council resolves to declare a climate emergency, pledge to take action with a view to making the Borough of Redcar and Cleveland carbon neutral by 2030, taking into account both production and consumption emissions. Call on the national government to provide the powers and resources to make the 2030 target possible. work with other governments, both within the UK and internationally, to determine and implement best practice methods to limit global warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. Continue to work with partners across the borough, region and neighbouring authorities to deliver this new goal through all relevant strategies and plans, and report to the Borough Council within 6 months with the actions the Council will take to play its part in addressing this emergency. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Sue Jeffrey, please.
Yes, I want to move an amendment, please, Mr. Mayor. We do have it, if you want to. Okay, I'll just let that be handed out before Can I say, Mr. Mayor, that this amendment is not about in any way negating this resolution. It's absolutely about supporting it, but it's very much about the practical measures that we can take to introduce a carbon-free borough. And whilst, I think, did you say, Councillor King, a 450-acre forest would do it? I think we probably need a bit more than that, and that's what this amendment is about. So if people have it in front of them. Has everybody got a copy of the amendment? No, it's on the back of our. We've got it. Chairs. Everybody got a copy? I hope this isn't eating into my 10 minutes, Mr. Mayor. Okay, so the amendment is, as Councillor King has just read out, but at item 3, we delete call on the national government and insert recognises that to achieve this, national government must provide the powers and resources to make the 2030 target possible. This must include protecting our manufacturing industry and associated jobs by facilitating an industrial carbon capture, storage and utilisation network in our borough, including backing the development of the clean gas, low carbon electricity generation project at the South Tees Development Corporation, by providing the necessary support and funding, in particular by agreeing a contract for difference to provide the clear, stable and predictable revenue that is needed to make the project viable. Secondly, by putting the necessary legislation in place to make the transport and storage infrastructure for carbon sequestration a nationally regulated asset to ensure the risks of setting up and running a CCSU network are properly managed and owned. And then another slight amendment at paragraph 4, which is work with other local and regional governments, both within the UK and internationally, to implement best practice. So that's the proposal. Just to say why I'm doing that, it's because we need to put pressure on government around the whole clean gas project for carbon capture, storage and utilisation. I don't know about you, but I believe passionately that we need to reduce our carbon emissions, but also we've got to do that in a way that protects industry and jobs and ensures that we move to a zero carbon economy in a way that supports our people. And the South Tees Development Corporation has as its unique selling point the fact that it will be a low carbon area.
Councillor Jeffrey, can I just ask if the motion is seconded?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. Apologies. I won't go through that first bit again. So, today, our borough, as many people know, is home to around 60% of the UK's energy-intensive industry. We've got one of the most integrated industrial sites in the UK, and we've got huge ambition for that to grow. We know we're all talking about 20,000 new jobs over the next 25 years on the South Tees Development Corporation site alone. You can't do that without using resources. You can't do that without using energy. But our highly productive, highly paid, highly skilled industry, which will make a significant contribution to our local and national economy, is also one of the highest carbon emitting areas in the UK. We emit something like 5.6% of the UK's carbon dioxide emissions here in the Tees Valley. And the fact is we cannot decarbonise the UK and hence the world unless we do something to decarbonise the Tees Valley. And there's no doubt about that. We have got a plan, and we've been working to deliver through the Tees Valley Combined Authority that plan for some time now. And carbon capture and storage is a crucial piece of the infrastructure. And basically, there's something called the Teesside Collective that's been working on the delivery of carbon capture and storage proposals for the last numbers of years. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. If and when we do get the carbon capture and storage network and we produce low carbon hydrogen, we can also use that hydrogen to fuel transport and heat our homes and power our industry. Again, a whole hydrogen-based economy is something that we're trying to deliver through the Tees Valley Combined Authority and the work that we're doing there, and it's really important that that is supported. Thirdly, we are just about to embark through the Tees Valley Combined Authority on something called a district heating scheme, which is actually going to use a lot of the energy that is currently put out into the atmosphere, take it, harness it, and use it to heat James Cook Hospital, use it to heat the university, use it to heat homes and businesses. Another really important way of utilising what is currently waste energy. So that district heating scheme is waiting to get started. And we also, of course, know about the vast renewable energy resources that we've got off the coast, things like Dogger Bank. So they're big projects, big challenges. We need government to act. And we need them, as I say, to develop this robust approach to funding carbon capture and storage. So the amendment is about the clean gas project. It's about making that project a reality. So what I'm asking this council to do is to amend the motion so that we lobby government to back the development of the clean gas, low carbon electricity generation project, and in particular, get them to agree that they will provide the appropriate contract for difference to provide clear, stable and predictable revenue. And secondly, and this is really, really important, that we actually put in place this regulated infrastructure that enables the transport of carbon back out under the North Sea. So what this motion is doing, or this amendment is about, it really is doing the thing that you want to do, delivering that low carbon future, but also doing it in a way that allows us to protect and grow our industry and deliver jobs, and do it, we hope, in a way that ensures that we can become that zero carbon borough that we want to be, and indeed many others will follow our lead as well. So I hope you'll support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor King, would you be prepared to accept that amendment to your motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll be happy to accept that amendment.
Yeah, and does your seconder? Yeah. Would all members be agreeable to the amendment becoming part of the original motion? Everyone okay with that? Okay. Thank you very much. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Kay, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's the end of this council after this meeting, virtually. So I think... Have we got another one?
We've got another one.
Oh, good God. You've spoilt my... Right, okay. We're coming to the end anyway. And therefore, I think it's a suitable time to talk about the apocalypse, particularly with the Reverend here. You know, I can't help thinking that this problem is far deeper and more embedded than either of these motions indicate. It's a worldwide problem, and we are just one little pinpoint on the surface of the world. However, of course, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do our bit. But I feel mankind is like, again, being a bit biblical, or very biblical, it's like a plague of locusts, which has taken the world over. We don't live in harmony with our fellow creatures or with the environment anymore. We dominate it and exploit it. And this is why we've ended up as we are now, with the threat of global warming because of all the emissions, and the threat of a polluted sea because of the plastics, which in fact I think that's even a more serious problem, the plastic which floats about there and will take thousands of years to disappear. So I feel I'm always a bit suspicious of growing the economy forever. You know, that's what all governments, and in a democracy you're bound to get that, aren't you? Because if you don't grow it, you'll get criticised. But I think we must perhaps in the future look at ways of bringing growth down to zero, and I would also think that we should be looking at limiting our population more than we have done in the past. This borough always wants to bring more and more people in. And I'm not talking about immigrants, I'm talking about stopping people going to Stockton and things like that. But the more people, the higher standard of living they demand, then the greater strain on our resources and the greater amounts of pollution we're going to generate. And I honestly believe that other countries, like, for example, China, they pay lip service to this, but they're building a power station nearly every day of the week. And they're not really going to do anything until perhaps Sri Lanka disappears under the Indian Ocean. And even then they might not do anything. So this is a great challenge facing mankind as a whole. And we're just tinkering with it at the moment. You know, it's all good. We're changing our lighting systems. We're trying to recycle a bit more efficiently. But, and we should do these things. But the world and human beings have to learn a lesson that in the end, as a species, we're digging a hole for ourselves, because we will be the ones who suffer in the long term. So I will vote with the amended motion, but it's with a sort of sorry heart, because I don't really think we're going to change very much until people wake up to this problem in a big way and start putting the brakes on humanity as a whole.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. There are a number of members wishing to speak. I will keep strictly to the 5-minute deadline, and if members would please respect that. Councillor Larrington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be supporting Councillor King's motion and the amendments. The only thing that I was concerned about regarding the amendment is that when we contact central government, normally they don't take a blind bit of notice. And so that was the only thing that I actually thought about, that the amount of times that we've been in touch with central government over different issues, it would seem that we don't really exist. I know that Redcar and Cleveland are doing as much as they can, and that is applaudable, but whether we'll get any reaction from central government is, we'll wait to be seen. It is a good thing. I was speaking to the young lady downstairs with the banner prior to coming into the council chamber, and as Councillor Kay has said about the international global problems that we've got, and there isn't a lot of people signed up to this or doing anything about it. However, that doesn't matter. If Redcar and Cleveland are doing it for our residents, then that will do. But my only problem was with the central government issue. We will wait to see if they contact, reply, give us anything. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lanningham. Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine won't take very long. It's a shame, because we've been warned about this for years and years and years. And it's a shame things have to come to a crisis before we start to look at it. You know, and it's the same with the plastics in the sea, but people are now listening about the plastics in the sea only because they're seeing the animals, you know, with choking on things, and it's only when you see it that. But this climate change, we know it's happening, and I mean, I'm 71 now, so my children are basically old enough, but it's my grandchildren I'm bothered about. And if we don't make a stand, and we don't show the children that it's wrong, and we've got to support it, and I will be supporting I would have supported the motion, but I'll support the amendment, obviously, because I think at the end of the day, we've got to care. You know, where are we going to end up? And we have been told and told and told, and we have not listened. And we've got to listen, and we've got to tell people, and we've got to really try to put things right. Otherwise, what's life about? So I will be supporting the motion, and I just hope we can do something about life as it is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Councillor Massey, please.
I thank Councillor King for bringing the motion and for accepting the amendment. The motion is amended ensures that this council has the chance of doing something about the climate emergency that the original motion talked about and that the motion as amended continues to talk about. We're all aware, and we'll see this in our Flourishing Future report, which is the next item on the agenda, that this area, this borough, is a large emitter of carbon. We as a council have took great steps over the last 8 years, 9 years to reduce this council's impact and this council's carbon footprint, and I think we've been sector leaders in that. However, we're equally aware that to do more we need help from central government, because a lot of the things that emit carbon in our borough, a lot of that industry is outwith of our control. And that's why the motion as amended now speaks about developing those schemes around carbon capture, etc., to help our industry, which delivers the vital jobs that our residents need, deserve and undertake, to help reduce that industry's footprint too. So I urge members to support the motion as amended.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Councillor Holyoke, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I heard this and Councillor King talked about Jess, I mean, I was actually driving through Gisborough when they had the demonstration a couple of weeks ago, and that was an international demonstration. It wasn't just held in Gisborough, even though Gisborough is the centre of the world, as we all know. But there was a lot of people there, Gisborough, from Pride Perscott College, from Askham Bryant College, young people who had just actually come and joined them. I did think of stopping the car, but I thought they'd probably kick me out because I was 40 years too old. But I did beat my horn and give them a wave just to let them know I was supporting their motion. But then Mary spoke about speaking to the young people here as she came in. Last year we had Kellen Hadfield, who came here, Member of Youth Parliament, asking for votes at 16. Now, in my mind, it's the 16-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds are actually taking control of this motion. Now, I'm personally, the little science bit in my mind must be yay big in my brain. It is teeny tiny. But my background is in history. And what I would really hate is for history to look back at Redcar and Cleveland Council today and sit there and say, they did nothing. So I'm really pleased we've got this motion. Pleased the amendment was passed, and I really would sit there and say, let's history turn around and say, Redcar and Cleveland wanted to do something about this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Holyoke. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you. I mean, I'm particularly pleased to be supporting this and the amendment, as the amendment actually locates issues which are in the here and now within this borough, and indeed within other parts of the UK and Europe which are similar in their economic structure. It provides targets that we can work to. It provides for the development of technology which can be utilised not just in Redcar and Cleveland but across the world. And I think the previous speaker talked about in China, they're opening a new power station almost every week. This is the kind of technology that China needs. It's the kind of technology that India needs. It's the kind of technology that Russia needs. Now, I appreciate at the moment in a world dominated by the strange pecking order of President for Life Z, the strange little man who runs the Kremlin, and the even stranger, bigger man who runs the White House. Things like this are probably not on their agenda, but these people don't last forever, and hopefully we will be seeing changes in the big advanced nations which will allow for this kind of technology to be agreed on it as an international and regional targets for them as well as for us. And if that happens, then that provides a growth market for technologies developed in the Tees Valley. The one thing we want to make sure, and I speak as somebody interested in industrial archaeology, is that when you go out and you're looking at the old mining heaps, you're looking at the old mills in the West Riding, look at the old textile mills in the Upper Tees Valley, how industry in the past, once it had utilised its purpose, just left an ash can, a dirty ash can in the communities that it extracted value from. We don't want to see that again, and indeed what I want to see is this resolution to go through and to actually deny the ability for perhaps future industrial archaeologists to say, this is what we did in the 21st century. No, we need to actually carry on and bequeath to future generations a far cleaner and a far greener Teesside, and a resolution like this can actually provide that. If there is a will from central government, and if there is a will from Europe, because much of the regulations that we work through are now European, and with the hopeful news over the last few days that bring the second referendum and hopefully an end to this nightmare much nearer, then again we've got something here which can be seen as a European target as well as a Redcar and Cleveland target. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do accept the amendment, but I do have reservations. It's very easy to deplore the destruction of the rainforests, but we don't look closer to home. The suggestion in this amendment is that we rely on technology, carbon capture, storage schemes. What we forget is, as Councillor King mentioned, what we have locally and what we're destroying. In Gisborough, we have the rural hinterland. We had a massive forest along the hills there. Over the last quite a number of years, they've been torn down to feed a wood burner at Wilton site. We gave planning permission for that. The trees aren't being replaced. Some of them, they're being rearranged, but there's vast swathes up there with nothing now. Alongside the technology, I would urge this council to look at its own patch and retain the trees.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. I'm absolutely amazed it's taken this long to get to this debate, because it's clearly the most important issue facing not only this council, but the whole planet itself. It's even more important than Brexit. I think some people might not agree with that. But before I say what I've got to say, I just want to make a plug for a book, and it's called The Uninhabitable Earth, A Story of the Future, by David Wallace Wells, who is an American, ironically, environmentalist. And this book was published earlier this year, and it presents horrifying potential scenarios, but it deals in facts, not the fantasies of the climate change deniers. I'd just like to say as well a word on the carbon capture salvation. It may alleviate, but it certainly won't cure. And one estimate has said to have a hope of less than a 2-degree rise, we need to open new full-scale carbon capture plants at the pace of 1.5 a day for the next 70 years. Whereas globally last year, 2018, across the planet, there was only 18 such establishments. So these Americans would say, do the math. The IPCC, which was mentioned earlier on, its next report is due in 2022. Last year they told us we had 12 years to get our act together. Incredibly short space of time, 2030. But their latest interim report says, if we take action on emissions soon, instituting immediately all of the commitments made in the Paris Accords that no were actually implemented, we are likely to get approximately 3.2 degrees of warming, or 3 times warming since the beginning of industrialization, bringing the collapse of planetary ice sheets into the present and eventually flooding Miami, Dakar, Shanghai, Hong Kong, plus 100 other cities across the planet. I believe world governments, and particularly in the developed democracies, are concealing the facts from their citizens because they don't want to face up to the truth. On the 15th of February, the day after the last full council meeting, there was the first global school student strike, including students from the UK, as you know. And bizarrely, you know, the climate crisis situation isn't even in the curriculum in our schools. It's dealt with peripherally. That action was criticised by the Prime Minister, incidentally, and the schools minister was on record as saying all those kids would get themselves as a place on the dole queue. But it was applauded by the leader of my party, so that's a defining difference between us and the Tories. And the second global school student strike was earlier this month on the 15th, and over 1.4 million children participated in that. And it's not finished yet, because the next one's on the 15th of April. And as some of you will know, this has all been inspired by the 16-year-old Swedish student, Greta Thunberg, who's conducted a solo protest every Friday outside the Swedish Parliament since August of last year, trying to persuade Sweden to meet its Paris climate targets. She's been to Davos, she's spoken to the world leaders, the people that go around in helicopters, she's been to the EU, and apparently she's been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize, so good luck to her. The unanticipated cyclone that has devastated Mozambique is a prime example of a poor, low-lying country becoming a victim of industrialised countries' excesses. And in the process, they are a blameless victim, suffering in excess of likely 1,000 deaths. Last week, the chief executive of the Environment Agency warned in a somewhat low-key speech that England could run out of water in 25 years. And in the Pacific Ocean, there's an island of plastic the size of France, which is just slowly rotating.
Can I ask you to sum up, please, Councillor Jeffrey?
In February, it was reported catastrophic insect decline is underway that risks total collapse in global ecosystems. 2.5% an annual fall over the last 30 years. Insects could vanish within a century. We know about the bees. If they go, we follow them. 5 years ago, the eminent Canadian environmentalist Naomi Klein published her book, This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, which broadly deals with our children's inheritance and points out the conflict between saving the planet and its people and the dash for profit. She argues for more sustainability, fairer societies and shared resources. She also makes the case... I've just about finished, Chair, please. She also makes the case for all fossil fuels to be left in the ground now, and the need for a massive shift into renewables for energy needs. A message incidentally lost on Barclays Bank, for example, which has invested $30 billion in fossil fuel companies over the last 5 years, and incidentally previously propped up the South African apartheid regime. The UN recently estimated 1%.
Jeffrey,
Sorry, Chair, 1 minute. The UN
sorry.
recently estimated 1% of the world population.
Councillor Jeffrey, I'm sorry, time is up. I remind members, I am not going to stand for being not respected like that. I did say at the beginning, 5 minutes, I did give 30 seconds warning. I will cut off any member that goes over that time. That's a warning, not for just this meeting, but for the next meeting as well. Okay. Councillor Thompson, please. Sorry, Councillor Eyre.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I don't think anybody really there can argue against the spirit and intent there of the motion, but and I am pleased there that the amendment has been agreed by the chamber. I am not, and people may ask, who am I to say that I'm not truly convinced that global warming is solely man-made. However, don't have time there to develop that argument or debate. However, having said that, I'm pleased there that the amendment has been made. Otherwise, if we'd have still have had an iron and steel industry, I would have had, personally, I would have had problems supporting the motion if the amendment hadn't been accepted. The iron and steel industry, as I say, sadly there we don't have one now, but the South Teesside works, British Steel and Chorus and SSI and what have you, yes, probably they're the biggest carbon output in the country, as steel works. But over the decades, there's been tens upon tens upon tens of millions of pounds from the EU, and no doubt other countries have done the same, trying to experiment to make steel from iron without it first going through a blast furnace. And after decades, they realised it can't be done. So that's why I say I am pleased that the amendment has been changed, it has been accepted. It does include employment, taking into consideration employment and saving jobs. What I am disappointed about is consecutive governments, and it doesn't matter which party was in power, their sort of lack of interest, their sort of lack of forethought on carbon capture, first muted a few decades ago. Very little has been done about it. Nuclear waste, depending on which expert you listen to, that can be safely buried 50 years, 100 years, 150 years. By then, nuclear waste, it's an undeveloped source of energy, and surely by 50 or 100 years, somebody's come up how to turn that waste into some sort of energy there for our industries and buildings and homes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Eyre touched on a point that it's interesting that he doubted that all of the climate change and the increase in the challenges we face is man-made. That raises a question. There are people in this chamber, we know, who do not believe that the climate change is man-made. We must grasp this challenge.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Let me wait. I said it not solely man-made.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre, for that
I'm not
order.
blaming it all on man-made.
Thank you for that point of order, which was a point of information which I'm very pleased to receive. I didn't indicate other than that. There are so many issues. To talk for 3 minutes is a challenge in itself, and I'm going to try and pick out some salient points. First of all, we continually asking national government to fund what we want to do. We've had devolution, have we not, to Tees Valley Combined Authority. We, as a part of that authority, must make every effort ourselves to engage with the industry that we are hoping to bring. And if by default we do not get funding from national government, it should not be the failure of this motion that results from that. So our endeavours as individuals and as a local authority are of prime importance. If we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030, that is the most incredible challenge. One of the tenets of the industrial revolution that's going to be taking place is the production of hydrogen, and we're going to be using hydrogen vehicles or partially funded and energized vehicles, trains and cars. If the source of the hydrogen generation is not from good feedstock. We have evidence that across the world where it is produced, although it's primarily produced in the northeast in the UK, we can be producing 9 to 10 tons of carbon dioxide for the production of 1 ton of hydrogen. So we've got to be really critical about how we go about this. So to ask this council to come back within 6 months with a programme of works is a challenge indeed. I'm not going to take that challenge away from this chamber, but I'll be very interested to see how it rises to it. So there's lots of discussion technically, with erudition that no doubt will come into the discussion. What can we do as individuals and residents? And I think that's probably as important. So we've talked about how can we help with recycling, because that in itself is a very positive contribution to reducing the incineration of waste needlessly. So our performance at the moment nationally is, our performance locally is something like 46% of our refuse is recycled. We know, do we not, that the best performing local authorities in the UK are performing at levels of between 61 and 63%. So that should be our target, for one. We have already declared ourselves a single-use plastic-free borough, have we not? How efficiently are we actually delivering against that target? We are not getting any feedback to tell us. We ought to be doing more to reinforce that and working with suppliers on our procurement that we hear is getting more efficient. So we need leadership. We have to provide that. It's all very well saying plant lots of trees. We need a tree management strategy. Now this borough actually does have a tree management strategy. Where is it? Which file does it lie in? How are we propagating that, if I may use a word? So we have work to do. The local authority is part of the Tees Valley Combined Authority. £1.4 billion of spend is committed for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Can you sum up, please, Councillor Thompson?
We should be making sure that that is being directed to this very cause.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Mason, please.
Am I on? There's really very little left that I want to say that wasn't already covered by Councillor Ian Jeffrey, except that I just wanted to highlight really that last week I was listening to the news bulletin on Radio 4 as I do most days, and on the 8 o'clock news bulletin there was a line from the presenter, and the presenter simply said, "Up to 1,000 people have been killed by floods in Mozambique." And the whole of the rest of the news bulletin was dedicated entirely to discussion of what's happening in Westminster and the Brexit debate. And what I really want to know is, why aren't people more incensed? Why aren't people furious about the fact that 1,000 people, 1,000 men, women and children have died in Mozambique as a consequence of an extreme weather event, which in my view, and I'm no expert, but in the views certainly of many experts, is a direct consequence of man-made global warming. It is an extreme weather event, as we've been seeing so many of in recent years, whether forest fires, whether tornadoes, whether hurricanes, or whether monsoons. And why aren't people more furious about that? Why are we spending so much time discussing ourselves and looking inwardly and neglecting our partners and our colleagues and our neighbours around the world? And the real irony, of course, is that whole Brexit debate, the whole of the rest of that news bulletin, was about looking inward. It was about negating our international responsibility to just think about ourselves. And I take note of Councillor Lanigan's speech. She's not here now. But the government is too busy. The government is too preoccupied. So it is absolutely essential that people like us follow the lead of Jessica and the school children, that people like us at the grassroots of local politics, that we start speaking up for these issues, because so many of our international leaders now, as we all know, are neglecting their responsibilities to climate change, whether through populism or idealism. And it is beholden upon us at the very grassroots to lead by example. And that's why this motion is so important. And I also take cognizance of Councillor Kay's speech. He pointed out that really what we can do at this level is so trifling in comparison to the rest of the world. And indeed, some reports suggest that over 70% of carbon emissions are actually produced by only 100 companies in the world, and that is quite a frightening thought. And I see his point, and I see that compared to an oil-guzzling international corporation, what difference does it mean whether if I put my yogurt pot into a blue bin? And the answer is probably not very much. But it comes down to the same thing. It's all about sending that message, making it very loud and very clear that here in Redcar and Cleveland, we take climate change very seriously, and we are committed to protecting and safeguarding our international friends and our children for future generations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we should welcome this motion and congratulate both Councillor King and Councillor Mason for bringing it to our attention. I think it's important that we all show that we have credentials as environmentalists and supporters of environmental change. I just want to contradict and question the rather pessimistic tone of Councillor Kay's remarks. Of course, his support for Brexit is a way of ensuring that we do have zero economic growth in the country, or even maybe negative growth. But in order to have environmental change, we do really need positive economic growth. In order to do the research, in order to bring in the technology, in order to take action and to do the job properly. I've supported environmental issues since the early 1970s when I started teaching environmental economics way back when I taught in Cheshire. And I remember as well the Plant a Tree in 1973 campaign. Our 2 trees have been in 3 different gardens already. I don't think we'll be shifting them to a 4th because they're too big now, but it is a step forward. So we've made something of that sort of contribution. But I think the council can take other positive action than is mentioned in this amendment and in the motion itself. And we should start. This council should start to operate as if it were a real public authority, doing things that private business doesn't do. Okay, we've got the legacy of old Mother Thatcher to thank for the way in which, and the continuation of the present government as the way in we have to operate on a shoestring. But there are several things that this council could actually start to initiate. One is to protect green spaces with its housing policy. Secondly, it could start to have school buses so that the school rush hour isn't polluting the atmosphere with so many cars. It could also initiate a far greater emphasis on public transport. These are difficult issues. I'm not suggesting we could do this easily and at no cost, but it would be a start. And I think this motion is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. But we should congratulate Councillor King and Councillor Mason and indeed the leader of the council for being prepared to be positive and make a start in this direction. But it's action, not words, that really count.
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. Councillor Sue Jeffrey, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak again, but I do just want to make a couple of comments regarding carbon capture in the light of some of the comments that have been made. I mean, first of all, that I do not see carbon capture as a solution. I see carbon capture as just one little piece in the jigsaw that we absolutely need to put in place if we're going to start making the steps that we need to take to becoming a zero carbon economy, because that transition, the process of that transition, what we need to make absolutely sure about that transition is that it is our people the people who live and work in the industry on Teesside do not suffer as a result of that transition. We owe that to them. We've got to find ways to make it a transition that works for them. The second thing that I just want to say absolutely is that we do still have a steel industry in the Tees Valley and in Redcar and Cleveland. I would remind Councillor Eyre of that. It's at Skinning Grove and Lackenby, and we may not make steel anymore, but we do still process steel. And that is part of the reason why we have to find a way that these high energy industries can find a way, as I say, to move into a much lower carbon environment. And that is about using hydrogen, using renewables, using waste heat, all the things I talked about in my amendment. But if we are going to do this, yes, of course we can do stuff locally. And, you know, my yoghurt pot's as important as your yoghurt pot, and I'll carry on doing that. I think that's crucial. But there is a misunderstanding, Councillor Thompson, if you think that the Tees Valley Combined Authority can facilitate a carbon capture and storage a network within the Tees Valley. That is completely impossible. There are things that need to be provided by central government. That's why one doesn't exist in the country at all at the moment, not least of which is the guarantees and the risk mitigation that is required in relation to the network itself, that no individual company or company could ever provide. And that is a fact. And no, I'm not going to stop, Councillor Thompson. So the global consortium that's developing the carbon capture and storage project needs government support. It cannot be done by Tees Valley Combined Authority. I just want to say about planting trees as well. I mean, I plant trees with the rest of them. I've got trees in my garden. I think our tree forum planted over 1,000, probably more than that, whips last year, which are about increasing the tree cover in Redcar and Cleveland. You know, it's a really important thing that we have to do. But it's like everything else, it's just one small part. It's the combination of things that will make a difference. And it's all of us having the energy, the enthusiasm and the will to want to make that difference that will ensure that it happens in the long run. And as I say, the reference to carbon capture and storage is just one element of that.
The King accepted the amendment, and therefore she should be summing up. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry,
I thought we'd voted on the amendment. Sorry. Oh yeah, you're allowed to do that. Yeah.
Okay, I have two more members that wish to speak. After that, I am closing the debate and will ask Councillor King to sum up. Councillor Corley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak today, but then last week my twins, the 7, almost 8, came to me. Seemed to think being a councillor I can change the laws and rules of everything, so trying to get them to understand what a councillor does was hard in itself. They've been doing a project at school and they've been watching a programme called For Ocean. Now it's about 2 brothers who set up a company that collects, they go out on the little pedal boats and collect all the plastic. So then my daughter came home and she said, "Mummy, why are humans so cruel?" And I went, "What do you mean, darling?" She went, "Well, we're killing all the animals, we're throwing the rubbish on the floor, we're piping everything up into the air. What's going to be left for us?" So then I said, I didn't have the answers. So she's watching this programme and learning, and now she wants to go every week with 2 carrier bags picking up litter. She went, "At least then I can help some way, Mummy." So I think if that's a 7-year-old saying that, the least we can do is this.
Thank you, Councillor Corley. Last speaker is Councillor Dr. Jackson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just like to point out to members, in case they aren't aware, that the Member of Parliament for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland was awarded the prize for the most green MP in Parliament recently. So I'm happy to support this motion based on following up what Simon Clark's been doing. And I wonder if the parliamentary member for Redcar would like to join him and give him a hand there. But it it is all of us who have to work together to do it, no matter what line of business you're in, or you know what you do at home. Small changes can make a big difference. For example, since getting my dental practice in January, we've reduced the clinical waste from 30 bags a week to 15 bags a week, but we've actually upped production in the practice, and it was very easy to do, and it's small things like that that we should just be all bearing in mind. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Jackson. Councillor King, would you like to sum up, please?
Thank you. Sorry, I thought Councillor Jeffrey would be summing up, so you've caught me a bit. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all members for your comments and for getting involved in the debate. Thanks especially to Councillor Ian Jeffrey. I think his comments really brought home the huge impact. And this motion isn't about skinny polar bears on ice caps, although we don't want skinny polar bears on ice caps. It's about everything. It's about everything we can do. Whether the 450-acre site, I think somebody may have had the decimal places slightly wrong. It might be 4,500-acre site, I'm not sure. But someone's done some calculations for me that we need 13.8 trees per person per year planting in this borough up to 2030 to make it carbon neutral. If there's a possibility of a forest on some unused brown belt, it might not be 450 acres, it might be just another small part of offsetting and taking into carbon capture technology. Climate change isn't an issue for tomorrow, it's an issue for today, and it's something we all need to take really seriously. Trees that are planted, if they're used for wood, housing, furniture, materials, papers, and then replanted, it continues on, and you know we're making good materials, reusable materials, and so thank you for all the comments on this motion, and I submit it. Council, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King. Can we put that motion to the vote, please? All in favour? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Item 8 is to consider and agree reports from Cabinet members. First one is delivering our flourishing future outturn. Councillor Massey, do we have a seconder, please? You were doing it. Oh, sorry, I've got a different name. And Councillor Massey seconded. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Chair. The Flourishing Future Outturn report was presented to Cabinet, but I'm just going to run through very quickly. I don't know how many people of you have got your minute book with you from Cabinet, but that's where the detailed report is. There's just a very short report in the council book. But I am going to refer to that report, so I apologise if you haven't got them. First of all, before I start talking about some of the achievements, I do just want to talk a little bit about some general comments regarding the state of the borough at the end of this council. And as Councillor Kay said, although he's gone, is he gone? No. Councillor Kay said, we are coming to the end of a 4-year term, and I think it's really important that we do just take a little bit of stock about what our 4 years has been and where it's got us to, and this report helps us to do that. I think there's no doubt at all that this has been a hard shift for all of us. The SSI closure on its own would have been enough, but if you add into that the other job losses, the cuts to the council services, the £100 million that we're going to have lost by 2020, then if you look at the other cuts in public services, police, health, fire, add into that the uncertainty brought about by Brexit, and you certainly end up with a pretty perfect storm, I would suggest, that has battered the people and the economy of Redcar and Cleveland relentlessly for the last 4 years. And I think all of us have seen people in our wards who are experiencing some very difficult times. If you do have the report in front of you, page 45 tells the story very starkly. In 8 of our health of the borough indicators, our position is worsening. In another 5, we stayed the same, and only in 6 have we been able to make any improvement. I think most worryingly, it is that 3 out of 4 of the prosperity measures, we sit in the bottom third in the North East, which is normally the lowest nationally. I have to say that I lay that blame for that very firmly on the austerity measures that we're having to deal with in Redcar and Cleveland, and that sits at the feet of the Tory and Lib Dem coalition originally, and then currently the Tory minority government. There is no doubt that the disinvestment in local public services is leading people to live poorer lives. And I've just heard actually that Amber Rudd has been saying in the House of Commons that 600,000 people are now living in absolute poverty in this country. Absolute poverty. You know, that's a disgrace, isn't it? So the abject failure to deliver policies that will support growth and prosperity in this borough is just not where we would want to be, I'm sure, any of us, when we were elected as councillors. And I mentioned in my opening remarks the whole business about the Stronger Towns Fund. And if any of you saw the blurb that came out with the Stronger Towns Fund, and you know, it's an interesting set of, you know, words, but basically that they said, for areas like ours, and I quote, the places that have not shared in the proceeds of growth in the same way as more prosperous parts of the country. That is an acknowledgement by government that places like the Tees Valley, like Redcar and Cleveland, has not shared in the proceeds of growth, that we have been left behind. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that it's only now that government has finally woken up to that reality, but at the same time is still not putting that cash in to enable us to provide the services that we need to deliver for our people. But having said all that, and that is the context, this report actually sets out some of the things that we have been doing successfully to try and mitigate some of the impact of that activity. And you know, I think we should be very proud of some of the outcomes. So just to go through them very quickly. Under strong and confident communities, our move towards supporting the plastic-free coastlines campaign. We've done things like extend the South Bank selective licensing to try and improve our private rented sector. The mighty Redcar, the award-winning documentary, was inspirational in many of the stories that it's told. Our Empowering Communities team and the Shine event that I went to a couple of weeks ago just shows how many people out there in Redcar and Cleveland are now involved and engaged and working with us. It's not the council doing it to them, it's the council doing it with them, which is what we should have always been doing. We're working through our Transformational Challenge team to help some of the most people with some of the most multiple and complex issues in our borough. We've helped over 660 individuals, and through that initiative saved 3.9 million in cost savings across agencies. We've been doing a whole range of initiatives to reduce poverty. We did the work on universal credit over Christmas, highlighting the impact that that would have on some of our families. And I was very proud just last week or the week before with Councillor Pallister to launch the new MoneyWise Credit Union Bank in Redcar, which is a brilliant initiative that hopefully will help people who are struggling. We've done a whole range of really good things as well in terms of promoting our borough. The 100th anniversary commemoration of the end of World War I was brilliant. In every town and village, I think, across Redcar, there was something happening, something going on, some investment in the cenotaph. And of course, we had the great Danny Boyle Pages of the Sea activity on the beach at Redcar. And then we've had the Redcar and Cleveland Ambassadors Programme, over 150 individuals, businesses out there shouting about how good Redcar and Cleveland is and what we are doing and where we're doing it. That's what we need. We need people talking us up, and that's what our ambassadors have been doing. In terms of prosperity, I've talked about the impact of the SSI closure, but of course the task force has done some excellent work. 340 new businesses have started, 23,700 training course places, nearly all of the people back into work, albeit not into as well-paying jobs as they were previously. The progress that we've made on the South Tees Development Corporation site, the employment and training hubs at Grangetown and Skinning Grove that have got over 1,000 people back into work, our area growth plans that are investing right across Redcar and Cleveland. There isn't one area of this borough that isn't being invested in some way by Redcar and Cleveland Council and being supported in some way. And then we've got the private sector as well, supporting our borough and investing in our borough. MGT, Sirius Minerals, the social enterprises that I was talking about before. Then you think about some of our children, you know, our primary schools, some of the best in the country. Things like the Beach House, which was opened last year or the year, just last year. You know, to walk around that facility that was done on a shoestring by staff of this authority to provide a really nice venue where children in care who do not live with their parents can spend quality time. That's the sort of thing that this council should be doing, and that's the sort of thing that we did do. You know, we are supporting young people. Our foster carers scheme, you know, has been fabulous. 60 more local authority foster care placements were provided in 2018 than 2017. I think somebody said that our 100th foster parent couple were identified this year, this recently. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah, great stuff. Signs of safety, a model being rolled out. I went to some training on that just recently. That was really interesting. Again, about trying to keep our young people safe. Redcar and Cleveland College, I've talked about. All the work that we're doing through around maternal and infant child health, through school nursing and maternal mental health training for midwives, a whole range of things that is about trying to give our children the very best start that we can. And then living longer and healthier lives, you know, a whole range of work. The Redcar and Cleveland Care Academy, trying to ensure that we do have staff to manage our care homes and ensure that our older people can have the care that they need. Park runs, our health and wellbeing board, the Cliffs, which was 25 purpose-built bungalows in, I think is it Loftus or Broughton? I can never remember. Broughton, isn't it? Yeah. But again, you know, a fabulous development that's providing care for older people despite the difficulties that we're dealing with. And then the dementia-friendly programme, which, you know, hopefully everybody's been on by now. I could go on for ages. I'm going to just say a couple more things about some of the great things. First of all, wildflowers. We love wildflowers, don't we? Who didn't like the wildflowers? Fabulous, all over the borough, or in many places in the borough. And if anybody feels that they've been missed out by the wildflowers, I'm sure Alec will talk to them and try and help. Small things like the flood defence system at Saltburn Valley Gardens that's going to protect the miniature railway. You know, just a great piece of work, and I still don't know to this day how they managed to get the digger down there to actually enable that defence to be put in. The Festival of Thrift, the Tour de Yorkshire next year, the East Cleveland Klondike, all the sporting events, the tramway, which is now up and working again, the Catering Academy, where investment's underway. Investors in People gold standard. You know, it's, and also, as I keep saying, it's not just about what the council does, it's about how we work with our communities, with our parish and town councils, and a whole range of others. So, just to conclude, Mr. Mayor, I think that this, as an end-of-term report for 4 years, is a pretty good report. I think everyone in this council has contributed to enabling us to be able to deliver that, because at the end of the day, we have been a collective on a lot of these things, and I think we should be proud of what has been achieved, and I really look forward to carrying on delivering on this same agenda post-May. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey, 5-minute rule applies. Councillor Lanigan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey, for your report. Just a few things that I've actually got here. The Community Bank. We in East Cleveland were quite excited when we heard about this some time ago. Unfortunately, it's based in Redcar. We've lost our banks in Loftus, and we are concerned about the post office, as you are aware. We are trying to do things there at the moment. Community Bank sat in Redcar is no good to the people in Loftus and the outlying areas. Transport won't get them in there, and so that was quite a disappointment. the employment hub down at Skinner Grove that is supported by Big Local, and there's a lot of the Big Local delegates actually in this room, and they are all volunteers, and that is starting to thrive. We aren't quite there yet. And the other issues that we've got with that employment hub down there is transport. We need to get these young people out of there and moving. The Gazette rang me yesterday or day before or about transport, and if we don't change the way that we look at transport issues within Redcar and Cleveland, we are never going to move forward. I remember we had a cabinet member in 2009 came up from central government, Mr. Hammond, who I actually met at that time at Saltburn Station. There was a promise then from central government that we would do something about the rail structure coming out of Darlington and coming into the East Cleveland area with faster trains. I know the Tees Valley are looking at this at the moment, but if we go back to the same scenario that we had before, let's give the buses subsidies. When that money runs out, there's nothing left, and we're back to the same scenario as we were. So we've got to look outside the box with this. If we can get faster transport links into the Saltburn station, then we can run out small buses, pick up from there to get out into our areas and get these young people moving. So I do applaud, and it's every member of this council, along with Councillor Jeffrey and her cabinet, who have moved quite a lot forward here, but there's an awful lot more to do. The Loftus area, we are still struggling, and given what's happened with the Arlington, which an awful lot of work went into there, including Father Adams, and it was community led, along with Councillor Davis and I and our officers at Redcar and Cleveland. Massive amount of work put into that, and it's extremely disappointing that somebody sat in an office somewhere can't see what this community is trying to do to get back on its feet. So we were absolutely devastated that they've looked at that and went no. So let's see what we can do with the High Street one. It is community led, Sue, and with our officers, and a great deal of work has been put into that with the passion of the people of the Loftus ward. And that's what this is about. And it's everybody that's come together. Our groups that we've got within our area are second to none, and I say that with a great deal of pride. Everybody is coming together, and we are trying to turn that town around and its surrounding area. But yes, we have come some way, but there's a lot more work to do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Lanigan. Councillor Owens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree that we seem to be relying more and more on residents, but it's bringing very successful partnerships, working with the council, residents, and raising funds locally. And in my own ward, great example of that, the Friends of Borough Park and the Friends of Redcar Cemetery. But we've got to be aware that a lot of people involved are not getting any younger, and we have to ensure that we have succession planning for these groups, and that we also continue to give them the community support, and even when they're successful, they feel that they have the council's backing. But working together is definitely the way forward. Sadly, when it comes to a national picture of the government, I sometimes feel, and my geography isn't my strong suit, but that there's a line kind of gets drawn along from Manchester to Leeds, and further north from that, transport isn't such a big issue. Finance, although we have been given money to the Tees Valley, I agree, but I think in comparison to what has been poured into other areas is not in the same league. I think we do our very best on the council to use what resources we have, and I completely agree that where this side have felt it's in the very best interests of the borough. We have been a supportive council working together, and I hope this continues into the next term, regardless of who might be sitting on these seats. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm looking at the basket of indicators which features in the report, and whilst there is obviously good news there, there are some issues on a regional comparison which bear closer examination. I mean, poverty of children, for instance, which as far as I'm concerned is directly correlated to government social policy, is at a scandalously high level. Some of us were present at the Health and Wellbeing Board last week when we received a presentation from the Director of Public Health. Child poverty in this borough is 29%, and would you believe in Middlesbrough, who are the partner on the board with Redcar and Cleveland, it stands at 38%, which is an absolute disgrace. Appended to the DPH's report was an appendix from the Chief Executive of Middlesbrough Council, which was the most refreshing and honest opinion I've seen from a chief officer for a long time, and it was actually quite a devastating indictment of the way the government, which wasn't directly mentioned, is actually dealing with people at local level through its own policies. And I think there was general sort of recognition that it wasn't good and it needs to be put right, and government takes a great deal of responsibility for ensuring that actually happens. The one indicator in the basket that presented us in the worst light was in terms of carbon emissions, alluding to an earlier debate where we come out 12 of 12 authorities. But as it says in the report, this reflects the amount of energy-hungry industry here, because clearly that's their responsibility. And it's in that light that I was concerned last week to hear about the West Cumbria Mining Company, which apparently is digging coal out of the earth, following a somewhat controversial decision by Cumbria County Council, which attracted local protest, not to mention Greenpeace, who called what was happening absolutely appalling, because as we indicated and agreed earlier on, the stuff should be staying in the ground, shouldn't it? But the plans from MCM is to send 2 tons a year of coal into Teesside, into the bulk terminal, as I understand it, for redistribution elsewhere in this country and into the EU and onwards. So that doesn't strike me as a very good deal for the planet, if that's the context we're going to look at this in. And going back to a comment that Councillor Thompson raised earlier on about the 6-month sort of time we were expected to wait in terms of the resolution for something to come back. When these issues were discussed in the last resource committees, I'm sure Councillor Nightingale will agree, we said we want to set up member-led task and finish to look at climate change responsibilities. And I understand that invitations are going out to members of the council as we speak for those that might wish to be involved in that. Perhaps you, like me, Councillor Thompson, will be putting your name forward, and perhaps we can truncate some of these timescales, and perhaps we can put some pressure on the people that, as are described in the report, energy hungry.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know you can't mention everything, Sue, because there's that much going on in the borough, but it would be remiss of me to overlook what's the good work going on in Gisborne with the Town Hall project, which is basically been sponsored by the Borough Council. Again, it's another community-led type project, which the Mayor's a member of the committee, and the same as Sheila and myself are all members on there. And it's not a small project, it's going to be a large project. You know, we're talking about maybe in the end something where in the region of about £2 million. And there's a lot of people turning up all the time to the meetings and working extremely hard. And we're getting to a stage now where hopefully maybe in the summertime we're going to get some scaffolding up there. Nobody's going to see what's going to be happening. We'll get complaints, what's going on, the scaffolding's there. But it's a tremendous project, and I'm really looking forward to the fruition and the end of this project around about, could be 2020, 2021, because this building I have no doubt about it. The word that we use is iconic. It's going to be a magnificent building, and it's through the work of this council, working with the community, that these things occur. So as I say, I will never ever overlook the chance to talk about it. But there's one more thing I must do, and I'm very sad to say this, but my friend Councillor Bob Norton there has attended so many meetings, and his backing, you know, has been absolutely brilliant. And if anybody could convince him to stay on the council, please do, you know. It's such a shame because his enthusiasm there, and he works so hard. He comes from meeting to meeting. But I'd just like to thank you, Bob, as well, every chance I get, and the council for its backing of this project. And like I say, I'm hoping in a couple of years' time, we'll all be there, we'll all go and look at it and just say, yeah, what a great time this has been, hard work, and this is the end product. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Watts, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Representing part of East Cleveland, I do have a problem when we talk of flourishing future. I represent an area that's deprived and isolated. I will start with the wildflowers before he disappears. It has been generally known that the one area in Redcar and Cleveland where the flowers didn't come up was Charlton's Village. 2 big beds, nothing. We're looking at achievements in secondary schools in this area. Again, they're poor. Mental health, there's been no action, no assessments, and this affects everybody in our borough. Children's services, we've had 2 assessments now that really says could do better. The Citizens Advice Bureau, which is particularly helping deprived people try to get through the initial stages of universal credit. It's been put in Redcar. 4G, which has been paid for to be implemented, but the last stage is in my ward, and there's no time limit given. We have no idea if we're ever getting it. The buses and transport in East Cleveland, unreliable. I mean, there is a timetable, but sometimes, particularly Charlton's, the buses won't enter the village. So you're reluctant to go out in case you can't get back. We have no railway stations, so improvements to trains, unless we take up the suggestion of busing to the train stations, we haven't got any. Sirius, we had talks from them in Charlton's because we suffered a lot of the problems with them initially testing the ground. And we were promised we would be first in line for employment. They have to admit now a lot of their people are coming from Whitby and Scarborough area. We increase our council tax, and we have to approve a over 10% of police budget precept. The very next day, the police announce they're taking the officers out of the neighbourhood centres. Well, our neighbourhood centre for East Cleveland comes from Gisborough. It had 1 officer and some PCSOs, 4 PCSOs, to do the whole area from Gisborough, Saltburn, right down past Loftus. You take the only officer off, what are we left with? So I'm sorry, we have, I've mentioned this before, the haves and have-nots. And certainly there is a feeling that finances are not being equally distributed in Redcar and Cleveland.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thanks for calling us. I just want to add a couple of things to comments that Sue made, and then I just want to actually pick up a bit about the dreaded word that was used by Anne Watts, which is council tax. The first is, in terms of adult services, we have done a lot, I think, in the 4 years. I mean, we started off by getting the Unison Ethical Care charter award in the first year. We've now got the academy, the Care Academy, that was again, I think, in the Majority Group manifesto, which is now up and running. And I had hoped, but the bats beat me, to have been at the opening of the Intermediate Care Centre in Eston. But with luck and helpful electors, I'll hope to be there when we do open it in the summer. And again, that's an illustration, I think, of the practical work on the ground that we are doing with our local partners in the NHS. Now, that's going to be an area which is going to grow exponentially over the next few years. It has to, because that's going to be driven by population pressure. But we've got to remember also that there's a danger in that the government are looking to structures for the delivery of care, which could end up with it being packaged off in such a way that we may have to be looking towards a situation where it's packaged up for tender and allowing the private sector in. That's the danger for the future. But the issue I want to pick up on, and I was going to do this under the Cabinet Members' Report on Resources, but that is apparently for some reason under the PERDA cosh, and we can't be political, so I'll do it here. And that is to look at the resource base that we use to finance much of our work, which at the moment, obviously, a key element is council tax. Now, one of the things we have done is we've basically gone through the exercise on putting comments in on the fair funding project that the government are running. But one thing we should be thinking about when we talk about fair funding is that council tax is the most regressive form of fundraising there could be for any local authority. It penalises people at the poor end of the spectrum, and it actually lets off and, in a sense, incentivises people at the top end of the income spectrum in the larger houses. Whereas it doesn't progress mathematically, it doesn't progress logically. It progresses in a manner where they don't want to upset too many people in the upper middle class. We need urgently 2 or 3 new bands at that far end to pick up on the house values that have gone up in the last 20 years. But I would argue that we actually need to perhaps just look beyond council tax, because however much we try to tinker with it, a regressive tax is always a regressive tax. And I think we need to do urgently across the country to look at the ways that we deal with revenue fundraising in other European countries. Because there are many, many interesting models out there, not just actually in Europe, but also in parts of the States as well, where you'd be amazed at the degree of, if you like, financial devolution that can be allowed to townships and states. Why don't we look, for instance, at the possibility of local authorities taking off a proportion of local VAT? If you look out there, look at those chimneys at Seal Sands and at Wilton, there's millions of pounds a day of revenue going through those chimneys in terms of the products that come out of them. They all net VAT, and that VAT goes back to central government. It could be argued that because we actually are hosting that industry, that we should perhaps get a percentage of that VAT back for local services. And I'm sure that would be actually something which even the managers in industry here would applaud, because it would be a benefit to them as much as it will be to the community. We need to look at ways where we can incentivise local transport. And again, some of the rules and regulations covering things like public service transport, bus operations and taxi operations certainly need a far greater degree of regulation than they do now. So what I would say is that when we come to arguing about future funding, let's think laterally, let's think outside the box, and let's look at opportunities that we can possibly argue for within Redcar and Cleveland that can continue the work that Sue's outlined for the benefit of all.
Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is almost a point of order. At the Resources Committee, when we were discussing this, I pointed out that on page 19 there was a glaring error of the on point 213 that council have lost 100 million per year. It might feel like that, but it's not the case, is it? So I think, you know, I'm disappointed the leader didn't actually mention that earlier on. Another point I think that we really need to do in these sort of reports it would be far better if we're able to have perhaps a more objective analysis of what is actually going on rather than a propaganda sheet. It may well be old-fashioned these days, but I think a SWOT analysis will be useful so we can look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats to the council. I mean, one of the weaknesses has just been mentioned by Councillor Walsh, and that is the way in which local government is funded. And I welcome his jumping on the bandwagon of that the Liberal Democrats for a long time have had, criticising council tax. And don't forget, the Labour Party was actually in government for 13 years and had the opportunity to do something about it, and didn't. So, you know, that is certainly a weakness. I think we should certainly stress our strengths and not denigrate the area too much by constantly talking about how desperately poor and how desperately deprived are if we want to attract businesses. There are opportunities in this area that we should be grasping. And of course there are threats, and I think one of the big threats is indeed, as the leader of the council mentioned, the Brexit issue. We should rejoice in the fact that the statistics that the Director of Resources produced for the Resources Committee some time ago on business rates actually showed that the Tees Valley has a trading surplus internationally. That clearly could well be under threat if we are to face more tariffs and barriers to trade after Brexit, if it actually comes about. So I think it's important that when we do actually look at our flourishing future, we do this in a wider perspective than is presented here. And I think it would be useful if the new council, in order to make rational decisions rather than populist decisions, would actually have some sort of information, as I was just been mentioning.
Thank you, Councillor Nightingale. Councillor Thompson, please.
I've got three observations to make from the report, Mr. Mayor. We talk about our flourishing future and how the South Teesside Development Corporation are aspiring to deliver 20,000 new net jobs. Every time we talk about that, we start with a different starting point. So we know that we've been encumbered by the Thai bank's refusal to give up their title to the land for whatever value. And we know that we've had questions about remediation, but all the time the starting point moves. So we've got to be very conscious in terms of our scrutiny of performance, picking up the point that the previous member made, that we've got to look outside of the box at where we are, but stay inside of the box to be monitoring our performance. We talked about a lady called Amber Rudd. It was mentioned in the dissertation. So I'm pleased to say that we have been lobbying on the universal credit front for amelioration of the way in which this is delivered and assessed. And I'm pleased to say that we have heard yesterday from the Department of Work and Pensions that Amber Rudd has listened to the lobbying that we have submitted. So now there is consideration being given to payments that will be made directly to landlords on request, payments that will be made to individuals in household rather than the applicant, because we know of all the concerns that are expressed by one person being dominant, particularly financially, in a household. So that is being addressed. We are also looking, we understand, at the disability allowances, where the new assessments have left some people who have had disability benefits previously disenfranchised. So that is going to be addressed. And we are also looking at the payment system of, rather than a monthly payment, which could be 6 weeks by the time it's agreed and then delivered, for that to be paid either on a weekly or a monthly or on a fortnightly basis. So these are all pieces of good news. A third point that was raised was about the introduction of the community bank. Now that is good news. However, we may not be all aware that it has cost somewhere between £465,000 and £550,000 to establish, depending on which report you read. But more concerningly, the interest rate that is being charged for small loans for those people who are applying is 42.6%. Now, I've asked previously for clarification of why this is and why we have to have such an extortionate rate being charged for people who simply want to borrow a small amount of money. And I also understand that the dividend that will be paid for investors is at the discretion of the board. So I may not actually, if I want to invest in the community bank, get any interest. So the question that I will be putting to the next scrutiny meeting is how we are going to scrutinize the performance of the community bank, which I applaud the introduction of. And finally, I would like to say that reference was made to contribution from volunteers. This is such an essential feature for two reasons. One is for the outcomes that results from that, but one is for the positive engagement with residents. When so often we talk about consultation and the end of that consultation appears to be negative.
Can you sum up now, please, Councillor Thompson?
So, support for volunteers, encourage that work, and I'm very pleased for all the people who participate in it.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Pallister, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just in response to Councillor Watt's comments on mental health. I just happened to have the last Cabinet report. It has the Director of Public Health's annual report. So in terms of what we are delivering, we are prioritising mums-to-be, perinatal and infant mental health needs of women and their families. And we're also looking to review that strategy and work and support fathers as well. For those women who suffer severe mental health problems, there's also provision directly referred from the midwifery service, and that's now being established. We've increased the awareness of emotional well-being in the borough, and the 5 Ways to Wellbeing approach is being tested as part of the Feel Good Loftus project. The Mental Health Training Hub continues to build capacity and improve knowledge and skills in mental health promotion and suicide prevention for the wider workforce. We currently have 460 young health champions, and they've supported 2,740 young people with health campaigns and messages. We have the Stepping Up Transition project, and that's been piloted in 3 primary schools in Grangetown to prepare Year 6 pupils for social and emotional aspects of transition into secondary school. We've also increased the number of providers that provide support to our schools and looked at the quality of that support as well. As you know, we are now a dementia-friendly Redcar in Cleveland, and we're currently working with 52 organisations and also have 16 dementia-friendly champions. We've implemented the suicide prevention strategy, and we also have one of the only areas that have a dedicated suicide prevention coordinator. I know that that's just a snapshot of what we're doing, and I accept that we do need to look at mental health, and that's why I reported at the last council that we should set up a task and finish group, and I know, Councillor Watt, you've expressed an interest, and I thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Pallister. Can I ask the leader if she would like to sum up, please?
Very much, Mr. Mayor. Just to pick up on a few of those points. First of all, on the community bank, I'm mean, I think the services that they're being provided by the community bank are extremely important. The front door is in Redcar, yes, Councillor Lanigan, but it's an online service as well, and it's accessible by everybody online. In addition to that, they have community development worker working with them, and they will be providing an outreach service where people want that to happen. But they are dependent on communities working with them to enable them to do that. So they certainly will do that. They are just setting up at the moment, so some of this has yet to be put in place, but it will happen. And just picking up on the point that Councillor Thompson made about how much it costs, the 600k that you're talking about, and that was the figure that I thought it was to set up around that. Don't forget that that isn't just for the Redcar and Cleveland one, that is for the whole South Tees Community Bank, which includes the Middlesbrough end of that as well. So it's more than just the one bank. And in relation to interest rates on loans, I don't know definitively what they are, but obviously the shorter the loan you have, then the higher the interest rate. But in this instance, they will keep interest rates as low as they possibly can. And of course, things that they won't charge are things that you would normally find with particularly a payday lender, which is like excessive administrative charges and early penalty charges that actually make the loan hugely more expensive than it would be otherwise. And it's these sorts of things that a socially responsible bank will ensure don't happen. And in terms of interest rates and dividends, yes, they are at the discretion of the board, but that's to ensure that the majority of the cash where it's available is delivered to the people in terms of loans going out there and that sort of thing. And I've had my money in South Bank Credit Union, or some of my money, not that I've got lots of it, but a little bit I've got in South Bank Credit Union for a number of years, and some years we get interest and some years we don't, and we put the money there because it's the right place to put it, and that's what we want to do. So I think we just need to give the community bank a chance, let it set up, and if it isn't providing the services in the outreach sense where we want them, then let's talk about that and find out how we can work with them to make that happen, because that's what we need to do. And you know, I absolutely understand that if you lose your bank from your village or your town, from the high street there, then you are actually losing a key part of what you need to enable businesses and all the rest to flourish. And for Loftus's perspective, the loss of the bank and the potential of the post office, you know, are really big blows, particularly if you want to grow the business place. And it's something, hopefully, that the Future High Street Fund proposal will enable us to be addressed. So that's really important as far as I'm concerned. Just touching on transport, because a few people have mentioned transport. There is this demand-led responsive community transport proposal that is on the cards, and that the Combined Authority is looking at the moment. This is, I call it an Uber for buses. I'm sure it isn't. Others would liken it to Dial a Ride, but a much more responsive Dial a Ride service. I know it was discussed at the Transport Committee of the Combined Authority the other week there, and it's in its early stages of development. I don't think we will ever have the days again when every single bus goes to every single village. It's just never, or estate, for example, because I mean, in a lot of our estates in Eston, Greater Eston, Normanby, for example, there's real concerns about buses going into the estates and getting people down to the village to shop and those sorts of things. So it's not just confined to rural areas. So we need to find an alternative way to do that. And as I say, this demand-responsive bus system is a proposal that's around at the moment. One of the other options is bus franchising, and that's fine, but obviously there's a cost involved with that. And it's, at the moment, we don't actually put any money at all into our bus routes, so there's no public sector investment directly to people like Arriva, which means they just concentrate on the commercial routes. But you know, fundamentally, unless we get our transport system sorted out and our connectivity sorted out, then we're not going to be able to connect people to the jobs we're creating. And interestingly, we talk about trains, but somebody said to me the other day there, think about trains, if you want more trains to go to East Cleveland, that's great, but think about that level crossing. You know, how often is that level crossing opening and closing now? And isn't that a big issue for us? And so if you're going to have more frequent trains, you've actually got to sort out the level crossing issue as well. So
can I ask you to sum up?
Yeah, I will. Sorry. Yes, there's a lot of points made. So just a couple of things there. I just want to say to Councillor Watts, I know Charlton's is on the periphery of the borough. I know it is, and I know that means that it's a small community and it is isolated. It does not mean that it's forgotten. It absolutely is not. And, you know, many of the things that we talk about rural East Cleveland apply to Charlton's. And if you feel that there is more that we can do, then I'm very happy to do that. But I do just want to say about Sirius, their local employment figures are very good. I can't remember off the top of my head what the figure was, just the latest one I heard, but they have got a good percentage of people that are employed from the Redcar and Cleveland area. They've just made their latest 215,000 investment in community projects through their community trust, which is a second tranche of money. And of course, it's not just who they're employing directly. They've got a big contract through Hargreaves, for example, at the moment. And a lot of people have been employed locally through the hub at Skinning Grove. So there's a whole range of more things I could say, and Gisborough Town Hall's great. And I look forward to seeing the scaffolding going up. But thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Right, we need to ask those members who agree with that report. Can you show, please, if you agree with the report? Okay, thank you. That's carried. Next item is the Redcar and Cleveland housing strategy. Is Councillor Pallister, is Councillor Norton's doing it. Have a seconder, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to comment before I move on to the housing strategy that in this uncertainty of Brexit, let me give you some certainty. I will be leaving council on the 5th of May. That I can assure you of. Moving then, if I might, to the
table, Mr. Mayor, and that motion is that prevents Councillor Norton from leaving this chamber. So I would like that to be tabled with immediate effect.
I'll vote against it. I'm grateful to my fellow councillors for their kind comments. But let's move on to more important things, such as the housing strategy document. And this is a fantastic example of where cross-party working in this council will achieve good results. And there is a good result, not dissimilar to the work we all did on the local plan. I didn't sit down and write that. The cross-party working group didn't sit down and write that. They contributed to it, they let their voices be known, and the officers of this authority drafted this document such that we could present it to Cabinet and today as a document that makes a lot of good reading in terms of a strategy. So I want to place on record my grateful thanks to Roger Kay for all the work that he and his team have put into this document. The report provides a benchmark by which this and the future council will be judged, because thanks to Councillor Thompson and his motion some months ago to this council, we will seek today to amend the constitution such that there is a policy framework that allows the cross-party group to meet and to review the progress of this document. So let me just track, if I may, a little bit of history. It replaces the outdated document of 2012, which should have been renewed in 2017, but wasn't because we were slap in the middle of our local plan process. In August of 2017, the Council agreed a motion adopting a cross-party strategy group to develop this strategy. That group met on a number of occasions and went on to develop a draft housing strategy and a document that contains key objectives, priorities and action points. There followed a 3-month consultation, public consultation process that went on from July through to October last year. There were 174 comments received, including the responses from various members of the council, all of which were noted and reviewed by the cross-party group. The housing group then concluded in December 2018 that the final housing strategy report was in such a position as to be submitted to Cabinet for approval, which it was, and now to Council for its approval. And in that approval process, we asked that the cross-party group would be facilitated such as to meet on a yet to be determined regular basis to review the plan, therefore making this document a dynamic document and a plan for the next 5 years, 2019 to 2024. We identified, Mr. Mayor, 3 key objectives, and I have truncated them slightly, otherwise I'll be here for much longer than I intend, certainly not beyond the 5th of May. Building homes to meet the needs of the population, improving standards of existing properties and revitalising deprived neighbourhoods, and meeting the needs of our ageing population and supporting people to live independently. Before I commend this plan to you and invite my colleague Councillor Pallister to talk more on the social housing aspect of this strategy, I want to take you through the 2012 to 2017 plan, because that's important, because it tells you what we delivered and therefore demonstrates what the next strategy document is capable of delivering. But rather than seeing these metrics appear 5 years after the report, you will actually see them being delivered throughout that year. So what did we do and what did we deliver in that plan? We delivered a new facility which we called Havelock Park, and that replaced, to many of us that know it, the horrible closest bit of Redcar that was becoming a problem to the whole of that particular part of the neighbourhood. But we did this in partnership with Beyond, as they are now, and Keepmoat, and they provided a mixed tenure of 344 houses and bungalows, including 143 affordable houses. We built, in partnership, the award-winning Eston Community Village and the extra care housing schemes that have previously been mentioned by the leader at Broughton and of course at Spencerbeck and again in Redcar. All again achieved in partnership with Beyond and the 13 Group. Empty homes to happy homes. With Beyond Housing, we brought 53 more properties back into use, making 104 units during the life of the plan. We built 1,750 new homes, of which 840 were affordable. We made significant improvement in progressing the condition of private sector stock, where the number of poorly maintained stock went down from 34% to 18%. We expanded on the private landlord charter to include 300 private sector landlords with 900 properties, where the scheme matches suitable tenants to properties, it improves property standards, and it provides for best practice in housing management, and it seeks to maintain properties to the decent homes standard. We have improved, through a successful funding bid, our Travellers' Pitch in South Bank. The local plan adoption agreed a mix of tenure of housing development until 2032. There was the introduction of the selective landlord licensing scheme to South Bank, which again the leader has mentioned as being renewed. And that, believe me, makes a significant difference to the way that people, landlords, manage their houses. This piece of news actually makes me feel very proud to have been a councillor within this authority. We renewed the council's homeless strategy. We prevented homelessness for 2,500 households during the life of the last housing strategy. Only 100 households, and I accept that's not a good number, it could be lower, needed to be helped through the homelessness legislation. We have expanded, as has been said earlier this afternoon, the use of local employment agreements in planning conditions, and the East Cleveland Hub and Grangetown Hub are indeed a testimony to that. Returning then to the strategy this afternoon, the new strategy, 3 key objectives. Building homes to meet the needs of our population with identified 5 priorities and 17 target achievements. Improve the standards of existing homes and revitalise the neighbourhoods. 3 priorities, 18 target achievements. Meeting needs of the ageing population and aiding independent living, 5 priorities with 14 target achievements. So that is, in a strategy document, 13 priorities and 49 planned target achievements, all aimed at providing housing fit for this borough and fit for the future, all of which will be achieved, I am now convinced, through continued cross-party working and monitoring via this council. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Councillor Pallister, unless you want to take questions separately. I'm comfortable. We can perhaps do a double up when it comes to the questions.
Put Councillor Pallister down to speak at the moment. Do you want to speak separately? Yeah. Can you? Yeah. Councillor Walsh is down to speak, but if you want to say something now, Councillor Pallister, please.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to echo my thanks to Roger Kay, who's always been an excellent officer. But I'd also like to echo my thanks to the frontline officers who work with our homelessness residents and work in some of the areas where we're trying to tackle rogue landlords and a range of issues, antisocial behaviour and vulnerable tenants, and all the support that needs to go with that. I'd also like to thank the cross-party working group. Councillor Norton has set out some of the achievements this council has made during the lifetime of the last housing strategy and the importance of delivering new housing supply to meet the current and future housing needs of the borough. The next part of the housing strategy in 2 and 3 is around improving the standards of existing housing and revitalising neighbourhoods. Members can see that as important as it is to build new homes, more than 95% of our housing stock is already in existence. 80% of the existing housing stock is privately owned, and like other parts of the country, there is a rise in the private rented sector. In Redcar and Cleveland, it rises from 10% to 18.5%. This figure is below the national average of 23.7%. I am pleased to report that housing conditions locally with regards to decent home standards are better than the national average, 18.4% compared to 21.8%. And we've seen significant improvements being made to the private sector housing in terms of non-decent decent category 1 hazards of nearly 50% since the last housing strategy. However, we're not complacent and we will continue to address non-decent housing conditions. Poor housing conditions can greatly impact on health and well-being of our residents. And although most of our private rented sector landlords do provide good quality homes and manage their tenants and homes really well, we do have some areas we need to target more resources. Over the past 6 months, we have been proactive in Carlin Howe, one of our most problematic private rented sector areas. This has included a series of inspections of all private rented sector properties in the streets identified as needing most attention. We've been working closely with the landlords to improve conditions and, where necessary, provide better management of their tenants. working across council services with our transformational challenge team, our environmental health officers, antisocial behaviour officers, and our key partners, the police and fire. Other work we're doing to improve the private rented sector is to continue the existing selective licensing scheme in Southbank and explore new ways to increase membership of the landlord charter. In parts of our borough, we recognise the combination of deprivation and housing market failure are significant issues. Therefore, in some neighbourhoods, the priority will be on arresting the decline of the area. Lack of regeneration funding, such as housing market renewal funding, can make it difficult to deliver transformational programmes. However, despite loss of specific funding pots, the Council is working with residents, BCS groups, developers and registered providers to deliver long-term futures for these neighbourhoods. The housing strategy also highlights that housing is not just about the condition of the home, as important as this is. It's about the neighbourhoods we live. It's about having an affordable home. It's about the neighbourhood, the people living in them homes feeling that their neighbourhood and their home is safe. And it's about having a warm home. None of these issues can be addressed in isolation and by the Council alone.
Can you sum up, please, Councillor Pallister?
Councillor Sue Jeffries has spoke about the work we're delivering in terms of tackling poverty, debt, skills, unemployment. We've joined the End of Fuel Poverty Coalition to campaign for action to tackle fuel poverty. We will work with private sector energy providers, partner organisations, the Energy Companies Obligation Scheme. In addition, we will continue to provide residents who are in or at risk of fuel poverty with the discretionary fuel poverty intervention grant.
Thank you, Councillor Pallister. That's time.
I've just got a little bit more.
How
Mr.
long?
Mayor, can I finish?
We've said 5 minutes.
Couple of minutes. The Redcar Cleveland Community Partnership also acknowledge antisocial behaviour and associated incidents such as off-road bikes. We work with the police very closely because this is one of the major impacts on people's quality of life in some of our neighbourhoods. The last section is around the ageing population and supporting people to live independently. Why the ageing population...
Sorry, Councillor Pallister, I want to pass on to the next one. We've got several others. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you. I'll be fairly brief. I want to thank Bob and Lynn for their introduction to this document. And it is, in many ways, a living document. In other words, it reflects the issues and needs of housing and tenure in Redcar Cleveland in 2019. But we've got to recognise that in that area of work, it is mobile and it is fluid. And what we're going to be dealing with in perhaps 2025 may be a very different world. One issue, obviously, that is important to us is the issue of antisocial behaviour, and certainly in many parts of the borough, certainly in areas like South Bank, Grangetown, but also increasingly in East Cleveland. We've had a long history of issues in Broughton, and issues are kicking off again in Skelton when we thought we'd actually killed them. They've started again. But the one factor that unites this is that the majority of this behaviour comes from private landlords and private tenure in traditional terrace houses, and it's the terrace house I want to concentrate on. As I said in the cabinet meeting, we've got to recognise that those houses were built in the 1860s, 1870s and 1880s with the concept they would be there for the life of the mine. They were built to house the miners and their families, and they weren't expected to last beyond the lifetime of the pit. Well, the pits have closed 60, 70, 80 years ago, but the houses are still with us. Many of them have been improved, extensions have been put on, new roofs have been added, things like double glazing have been put in, but they don't alter the fact that these houses were built on a cheap, thrown up in a hurry a long time ago, and are actually coming to the end, frankly, the end of their life. And I do think that by the time we come around to rewriting this document and looking at the challenges that are going to be facing us when we do rewrite this document, one of them I think will be looking very, very, very hard at some of the centres of terrace house in East Cleveland to see whether we can actually look to manufacture and to build new village centres, but in doing that to avoid some of the calamitous mistakes of the 1950s and 1960s. It has to be a very delicate job. It's going to be one that involves ourselves, the planners, the private landlords themselves, they do have a role, and also the residents themselves. It can be done. I think it was done very successfully when the old Westfield estate in Loftus was remodelled, an old estate which was built by an architect who said he was modelling Westfield on a Tuscan hill village, without perhaps realising that the weather conditions in East Cleveland are not the same as Tuscany, and consequently we've had to rebuild in the local vernacular, which I applaud. So, that's, I think, going to be the big challenge, looking at the traditional housing in East Cleveland, parts of Redcar, and looking to see whether in 2025 we can provide something new, something innovative, something different, and something which can then last for another 100 years. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Orange. Councillor Hunt, please. Sorry, Councillor Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, Philip. Great what you've done. I can only praise. I've been onto this for the rogue landlords, as you know, as a passion of mine for, 7 or 8 years when I first took it to Councillor Pallister. And Carling Howe has been a big problem, but the whole borough's a big problem. And I get carried away with rogue landlords, but it's a bigger picture. There's a lot more involved in this cross-party committee, which to me has made the big difference. And the help that was given by having one person help us, Jade, from the council, and I would like my thanks passed down to Jade, because since she's been doing just for Cali now, and I know we had that for a period of time, things have moved on a lot, and I'm pleased to say that I can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it is with working in a cross-party committee that has taken to that. And the licensing for the landlords, I hope that we are going to get that into East Cleveland, and I would like to see this party carry on, because there's a lot more work to be done in this field. And I would just like to say thank you very much to Lynn and Bob, and because the committee has really made a big difference, and for me to be standing up after 7 or 8 years saying that I can see the light, well, that's and not just for I'm passionate about the homeless, and there's so much more involved in this committee that can do a lot more good, and I would just like to see it carry on. I hope it just doesn't end there now that we've got so far. So thank you very much, and to all the committee, I think, who's ever been on that committee, I thank them, because we need it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Mayor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I'd like to link together what Councillor Norton, Pallister and Walsh have said. Sorry, Barry. Councillor Norton talks about revitalising the neighbourhoods. Councillor Pallister talks about decent home standards. Councillor Walsh puts particular emphasis on terrace housing. I have to disagree with him. I think it'll be a long, long time, perhaps another 100 years, before we see the end of the terrace housing in our borough. One thing that I don't think is in the report, and it's a crusade I've been following for 40 years now, which is the problem of the unadopted streets. If you're talking about revitalising the neighbourhoods, decent housing standards, if you're concerned about terrace housing, you should do something about the streets which abound these properties. We've done, in the 1980s, thanks to County Councillor Paul Harford, we did wonders in places like Skinning Grove Margrove Park and Charlton's, to name but a few, on adopting the, bringing up to standard and adopting these streets. We had another wave of improvements when we had the coalition administration on this council. Again, places were transformed. If you look at the village of Charlton's, which Councillor Watts has mentioned, and I agree with her about the flowers, something needs to be done about that because they seem to work everywhere else. But when I first got on the council, Charlton's had one adopted street and two unadopted streets. The two unadopted streets were like cart tracks. They were just muddy bridleways, you could perhaps call them. They were absolutely disgusting. If you go back to Charlton's now, we've got, through the years, we've got 3 adopted streets in parallel, and it's transformed the village. But unfortunately, there are still, over the years, we've achieved quite a bit, but there are still places where unadopted streets are a problem, and where I think we should, the only way to do it is to intervene. It's the only thing that works. In particular, the back street at Margrove Park. We did do up the front street in the 1980s, but the back street is an absolute disgrace. And I'm sorry the leader has gone out, because certainly if she's going to be leader after May, I would like her and whoever's the responsible cabinet member to, come out and inspect. Because if you want to talk about revitalisation of our neighbourhoods, decent home standards, improving the terrace housing, you've got to, I know you don't like it, the Labour Party, for some reason, it's a socialist party. I can't understand why it's so reluctant to do something about it. You've got to look at this problem of unadopted streets and get it up to standard. East Cleveland in particular has been let down by, before my time even, by previous councils who didn't tackle this problem. We have made some progress over the years. I would like to see it start again. 1 street a year would be sufficient, and we'd have finished the job by now, by the way. So people must, if they're going to have decent housing, if we're going to revitalise the area, if we're going to have decent home standards, we must have decent streets outside these properties.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very pleased to see that finally the motion that we proposed and had supported 2 years ago has finally come back to the Chamber. I would like to endorse and echo the comments made to officers who've served the working group and produced the final report. Thanks also to the portfolio holders who've helped to lead on this. When I first proposed this motion to set up the strategy forum 2 years ago, it was based on the fact that we as an authority don't really have a vehicle to correctly evaluate the needs of the community. And we've talked about people and not homes. We haven't really looked at the infrastructure that's very integral to any housing development. And clearly we haven't looked at transportation. Everything, I would think, up till then has been, and probably still is, to a majority degree, market-driven. So we need desperately to be looking at how we as an authority evaluate the needs of the community and deliver them. So delivering looks at challenging the traditional market-driven philosophy, identifying where housing needs to be built, for whom it needs to be built, and how it can be appropriately funded. But not just to say that's our strategy, that's our ambition, but that for it to be continually monitored. So part of the strategy is to allow the forum to continue, and there will be opportunity for cross-party members to engage in consultation, in evaluation, and in considered judgment about what the needs of the community in the future is going to be. Now, infrastructure has been mentioned on several occasions. That is very, very, very important. We were advised earlier that we don't subsidise any transport. In fact, we do, don't we? So we have a link bus that the local authority supports and subsidises, and I think at the last audit that was to some £120,000 per annum. It may now be more. I'm not saying that that is not justified, but I think in any discussion that we're having, let's get our facts as correct as we are able to do. So the key strategy, the key objectives that we're setting, I think are very important. I support these. I support the work that has been done, and I look forward to the continuing development of this concept of the forum. So I'm very happy to support that.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Norton, would you like to sum up, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to the adopted highways problem, Councillor Kerr, I know that you've been championing this cause for, well, ever since I came onto the council 4 years ago, and I think my sort of observation on that is not to forget it, but I'm not so sure it sits in the housing strategy, but I understand where it sits in the whole framework of revitalising areas, and perhaps I'm partly answering Councillor Thompson's point. It's important that the housing strategy document does not sit in isolation. If it does that, it will surely fail, because it does need to address all the peripheral issues that make up a neighbourhood that people want to live in, and that includes adopted highways, of which I've become something of an expert given my sort of foray into Longbeck and Skelton industrial estates, and the complexity of taking over a highway and turning it into an adopted one. There's the first challenge, Councillor Kerr, but I'm sure there will be somebody ready to take up that challenge.
We support what you're doing in Skelton because it needs doing. I know some of my colleagues don't really approve of it, but I think it needs doing, but it needs to be taken into the private sector as well.
Thank you. Can we ask those members who agree and wish to accept the housing strategy to show, please? Okay, that's carried. Thank you very much. Next item for debate is children in our care and child sexual exploitation. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The number of children in our care remains high. There were 300 children in our care at the end of February 2019, which, as we've said before, is more than 1 in 100 children in the borough. And the report at 2.2 sets out the types of placement that they're all living in. We often talk about the numbers of our looked after children. It's worth also bearing in mind the increasing complexity in the family lives of these children, which makes the work more demanding. And this is something that is recognised all over the system, whether the children are in our care or not. I recently spent an interesting day with the Youth Offending Service, and a former children's social worker there, who was a youth offending officer, said that her caseload of 6 was as hard as the previous 25 to 30 cases she had when she was a children's social worker. And so because of this demand, we aim to, through our revised recruitment campaign, attract more people to become foster carers in order to shift the balance from independent fostering agencies to in-house carers. And this includes a focus on specialist carers for adolescents and sibling groups and parent and child placements, and those with social, emotion and mental health needs. We held a fostering information event on the 13th of February, which was very well attended. there were 15 individual people, which equates to potentially 9 extra fostering couples. We advertised the event in various places, on banners and in social media. We currently have banners at Saltburn, Mask and Skelton, but they will of course move around. The goal that we set ourselves for the fostering team in April 2017 was to recruit a further 27 more placements. But we've actually exceeded this goal, and with 38 more placements for our children in our care. So we're very pleased that we've exceeded the recruitment goal, but we'll continue to try and recruit more. At the end of, we'll be holding another Skills to Foster training event at the end of March, and we're currently assessing 6 fostering applicants. We also want to continue to support and to train our foster carers. And 19 carers recently attended our in-house training on emotional resilience, looking at the causes and symptoms of stress, whereby the foster carers absorb the child's trauma. And it also covered ideas for recognizing and managing this, because we recognize that foster carers need to be supported with training to maintain the relationships with their children, especially when they're known to have challenging behavior. 10 foster carers also attended support group meetings and had an opportunity to meet and ask questions of our virtual school head. In the looked after team, we continue to implement the signs of safety, safeguarding model. And I can very much see this model coming through, for example, in the fostering panel. Obviously, case files and applications of foster carers often involve a lot of historical narrative, the lives of children, the lives of carers. The signs of safety approach encourages a more analytical model of looking at these histories, and the language of that is very useful in the panel. We also continue to try to reduce the number of children in our care wherever that is possible, wherever it is safe for the children. We aim to reduce the number of young people entering the care system by enhancing our Edge of Care offer and introducing a short-term immediate response, accommodation and support service. Along with signs of safety, we also have signs of success, and the report there includes some achievements of our children in our care. For example, a young person who has not been able to continue in school has engaged well in a bricklaying course, and I think that's the kind of solution which I think often has very positive outcomes for our young people. We've had the first meeting of our new Children in Care Council group, the Have Your Say group, which met at Tuned In on the 26th of February. The focus of the session was future planning. It also allows them to gain skills, and the group very much regards the current corporate parenting promises as still relevant, and they very much want to keep them. We've also started work on planning and preparing the next annual Children in Our Care and Care Leaves Awards, and we'd like to encourage members to sign up to help with the preparation for that event. With our virtual school, which is responsible for the education of all of our children in care, whichever real school they happen to be in, the virtual school now has a new dedicated pupil inclusion officer, which is a very positive development. The officer will work with the children who are in danger of being excluded from school. It's already making a difference, and so far we've avoided the permanent exclusion of 6 children in our care in the 18-19 academic year. The Leaving Care Service is currently working with 140 young people. 10 of these are care leavers aged over 21 who continue to receive a regular service from the team. In the area of education, training and employment, a key element of successful transition into adulthood for care leavers is having appropriate access to meaningful education, employment and training opportunities, and we now have a dedicated career advisor based within the Leaving Care team for 2.5 days a week, especially to support our hard-to-reach young people. You can see at 5.3 a number of achievements by our care leavers, one of them gaining entry level in maths and English, another one having a children's book published, one who has now settled into her job as an executive officer with HMRC based in the Newcastle office. 2 have secured paid work experience with us, and 1 who is doing a 12-week counselling course. With our unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, currently there are 9 that are looked after, and we're providing Leaving Care services to 11 more. Through our work with the North Eastern Migration Partnership, we have been given the details of 5 young people from overseas who need to be resettled. Councillor Jeffrey sits on the partnership and has added some information to the report that the contract for these unaccompanied asylum-seeking children is moving from G4S to a company called Mears. He also reports that the partnership discussed some local authorities' reluctance to take these very vulnerable and traumatised young people. Councillor Jeffrey earlier mentioned the Beach House, which is proving a very valuable resource, our new contact centre. It enables, during contact between families and children in our care, to do a lot of different activities in a very relaxed atmosphere, and also to have one-to-one time and to do the normal things like cooking for their children and that kind of thing. With the sexual exploitation part of the report, currently there are 20 children and young people who are open to the VEMT practitioner group. And the age range of those children is 13 to 17. There's another section there on county lines. It's recognised nationally the number of children being criminally exploited is increasing, and our staff have recently received training on those issues. A local campaign event has been launched on the subject of child exploitation across the borough. The campaign aims to highlight that boys are vulnerable to exploitation.
Can you sum up, please, Councillor Hannaway?
Certainly. And the report contains one of the posters used in that campaign. And to end on a happier note, we also recently had our World Social Work Day event. I attended the event and gave out a couple of awards, and I can say with confidence that the event was very much valued by our social workers, who also enjoyed it very much from what I could see while I was there. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. Can I ask for a seconder to that report, please? Thank you. Councillor King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Hannaway. I'm going to have a little bit of a whinge, if you'll indulge me. Part of the reason I'm stood here today is my passion for improving the lives of looked after children. As a former foster carer with no spare rooms, I thought that unable to influence decisions from the bottom up, I could come at it from a different angle and you know, bring my experience. The day I was elected, the very first article that I was given was a booklet on how to be a corporate parent. The first meeting I went to was a meeting about my roles and responsibilities as a corporate parent and being there for the looked after children. I've been on the corporate parenting board for 4 years. I've been the chair for 3 years, and I'm pretty certain in that 4 years we've never had a full turnout at a meeting. I'm quite angry about what happened at the last meeting. I know I've forgotten to go to a children's services meeting. We have big, busy diaries. We have everything else. We have councillors sat in this chamber that have been on the corporate parenting board for 3 or 4 years that have never attended a single meeting and never submitted apologies. So the last meeting that we had was not quorate, which there's 59 council and only 1/5 of the councillors in this chamber are on that meeting. And I understand it might occasionally happen when things are going on, but the first thing we get told when we get elected, we're corporate parents, we're responsible. So I would just like to ask, we don't know who's going to be sat here. We only meet once a quarter. It's not time intensive. The meetings don't drag on for hours. I'm just going to ask the leaders of the groups and the individuals, during the next administration, can we please look at the people applying to be on the committees to make sure that they can make these meetings and they actually care about what's going on in these meetings, because to have a non-quorate meeting, and I'd like to say thank you because there's a lot of councillors in this chamber who've been to pretty much every meeting and done a great deal of work, but it's the same ones over and over again, and there's others that just aren't turning up. So during the next administration, if we can please ask that people only put their names forward to a committee as important as this if they actually have the time and the passion to try and make a difference.
Thank you, Councillor King. Councillor Walsh, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a very small question for Craig, and it's probably far too early to pose it. I will pose it nonetheless. Have we seen in recent weeks any alteration in exclusion patterns from Borough Academy? And in terms of our relationships with Borough, given that we have a new management coming in, have we set up the machinery to actually talk and liaise with the NET in the work that they will be doing at Borough and the associated primaries?
Councillor Corley, please.
It was just regarding the CSE post of the child exploitation. I'm aware now it's not just social media, it's also with your online gaming that quite concerns me, and the fact that now children can't even play games and be safe. So I just wanted to raise that with yourself, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Corley. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to exclusions. I know that there is considerable debate ongoing about the level of exclusion right across the board, but in particular where looked after children are involved. This is therefore a particular concern that we need to have. So I just wanted clarity on what support we are able to give and how we are engaging with the schools, however difficult that might prove to be in many cases, so that these children not coming from a traditional family do have the support, all the support that we are capable within our resources to be able to give.
Also, Councillor Ian Jeffrey, please.
Just on that latter point, if I may, Chair, the Education Task and Finish group that you'll be aware of, Philip, has just produced its first report. It'll be going through the cycle quite soon, and that's focused on transition, quite rightly, I think. What we've asked for within that report in terms of recommendations is that statistics around exclusions, temporary or otherwise, should be reported on a quarterly basis to Children's Services Scrutiny, and identifying the schools involved as well. So that picks up that particular point. They reckoned at the last count there was something like 80,000 unaccompanied asylum-seeking children in Western Europe, of which Lord Dubs, with his amendment some months ago, attempted to get 3,000 of into this country. His amendment was successful, but only 350 have actually arrived. I think if any of us, when our children reached the age of 18, they were sent some 12,000 miles across the planet, we would be horrified. But that's the fate that actually faces some of the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. They've gone through enough trauma, as is said in Craig's report, but they are children that we're looking after, whether they came from here or anywhere else. And I think within Craig's report, I'd like to ask in the future perhaps that we can have some information about the possible destination of these youngsters when they reach that age, by which time, of course, they will have settled in a family, they will have settled in a college or a school or whatever, and they'll be looking to this place to some sort of a home. But they can technically be returned to their country of origin. And some typically will be Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, places you wouldn't want to be returned to. I'm sure you understand, so I think we need that information.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Can I ask you to sum up, please, Councillor Hannaway?
Thank you for that cry from the heart, Councillor King. I think you made some very good points there, and very relevant points, and I hope that the next council they'll be taken on. Councillor Walsh, your question goes a lot wider than the issue of looked after children and education. So if it's all right, I'll get that information to you, because there's a lot happened at Freeborough recently, and too much for me to talk about here, but I will get you that information. Councillor Corley, yes, the issues with safeguarding and online gaming and other activities are very serious. Obviously, one of the most direct channels in terms of getting information is that schools quite often have information sessions for parents, but it is quite difficult to get a lot of parents to turn up to those sessions. So I think we've got to keep plugging away at that, because it is such an important thing, and it's an area where adults have very little idea often of what their children are doing. We'll keep plugging away at that, but that's the main issue, is the information is there, the schools are willing to share it, but often parents don't go to the sessions. Councillor Thompson, you ask about looked after children in schools and our virtual school. We are fortunate in having a very proactive and dedicated virtual head at the minute. And I think he would say, if he were here, that he has a good relationship with schools. So at least in this regard, they're not difficult to engage with. And as I said in the report, he is in constant negotiation really with schools about looked after children, many of whom have come from difficult backgrounds, and sometimes their behaviour is challenging, on occasion very challenging. So it is a difficult area. Of course, schools themselves have changed a lot in recent years, and often we've found in some academies their behaviour policy is sometimes what you could call a one-size-fits-all policy, in the sense that it makes less allowance for children who, as you said, come from difficult families. So that in itself is quite challenging. But putting all that together, the way that the schools have changed, the challenges of the children, and the work of the virtual head, I'm confident that we're heading in the right direction, and that more children are staying in school, fewer of them are being excluded, or fewer of them are having moves between schools as well. So I think it's going in the right direction. It's very positive. Thank you for your comments as well, Councillor Jeffrey. The info you asked for about destinations, I don't know if we would be given that information, but I'll check on that. But for the general points you make, yes, I think it is a splendid thing that in the times that we live in, with the conflicts happening now, the rise of xenophobia, the rise of right-wing politics, the culture wars that are spreading here from America, that we still, as a council, do the right thing by these young people and reach out to young people who have been through hell in other parts of the world, and that we welcome them into our community and give them a place to live and a new life. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Hannaway. Could I ask all members who wish to agree and accept this report to show, please? Thank you very much. That is agreed. As the meeting is about to exceed 3 hours in length, can I remind members that the meeting will automatically adjourn at 5 p.m. unless the council decides to set aside standing order number 9. Does anyone wish to propose that the meeting continues after 5 o'clock? And if so, for how long should we continue?
Mayor, can I move that we go until 15:15, please?
Do we have a seconder? Okay. Is that agreed? Everyone happy? A show of hands, please. Carried. Those against, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, sorry. That is carried. Carry on till 5:15. Right. Okay. Item 9 is report from a Cabinet Member of Resources. Councillor Massey, please.
One, it says that, well, effectively, this is an expurgated version that we're getting. I just wonder what has been redacted and what the reason for this is. It doesn't seem to have applied to other reports. So perhaps Councillor Massey or Mr. Newton could explain why PERDA applies to this particular report and not to others.
Yeah, I think the general idea behind this was this is a printed report of the council from the Resources Directorate. So I'm free to say whatever I want about the report and how bad the financial situation of the country is, thanks to the last 8-9 years of governments that we've had. But we didn't want that put in the report just to make sure that we were being quite clear to distinguish between the political and the council's position on this. So that's why that's there. You look like you really want to stand up again. I'll be very brief here because I know that we're short of time and I know that you're probably sick of hearing from me because of the budget reports we've had previously. So the only thing I want to say, well, 2 things I want to say. One is let's not lose sight of the fact that we've lost £83 million, 1,400 jobs, and how difficult the position is in Redcar and Cleveland, both now and for whatever the future administration may be. The second thing I want to say is that this might be the last time that I'm stood here delivering this report for a variety of reasons. So I really want to pay tribute and thank my officers, particularly John, but also the officers I've worked with across the Resources Directorate, so Steve, Pauline, Alison, Phil, Rob, etc. Probably people I haven't named, but I really want to pay tribute to them because they make me look good. So I move the report as read. As written.
They've read it as well, hopefully.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. I would remind members this is a question and answer session, not an excuse to make a statement, so please be brief in your questions. Councillor Foggo, please.
My question is about page 32, the priority clean and safe environment. In the feasibility of electric pool cars, in it you say that they're looking for a break-even policy where you need to do 15,000 miles. As we've just had the discussion about carbon emissions, which lasted over an hour and a bit, then surely we should not be looking for break-even, but just the practicalities of having electric cars, whether they are capable of doing the work we require them to do, and therefore cutting down on our carbon emissions.
It's a good point, it's well made. I think that the idea behind this isn't just to say that we've looked at it and we won't look at it from this point till the end of time. Electric technology is changing all the time, electric car technology is changing all the time, so I'm happy to take another look at this in light of those comments and the statement I've just made.
Thank you. Councillor Ovens, please.
Having not wished to stay, I'll just ask very briefly on page 31, and it was simply to do with the under 3.15, the community capacity, where there's 3 years without any input, not having explored this thoroughly. Given the fact that we said we're working with lots of groups and doing lots of things. I'm not quite sure what comes under community capacity, or whether that is supporting all those people who work together within our wards. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the work that you're talking about is kind of taken across the capital programme, so that's not there. That's a specific block. It's remiss of me, but I can't remember exactly what it's for. But community capacity is not limited to 1.2 million over the next 5 years. It is spread across the generic blocks that we've got in the capital programme, which is 129 million across the next 5 years. But I'll get you a definite answer there. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Glyn Nightingale, please.
Well, I was under the impression that politicians should keep their promise. And Councillor Massey promised us that he would be able to make political statements, and he hasn't kept that promise. So, if you don't mind, I can make a couple of political points. One is, I think we've got the worst government we've ever had in my lifetime, and that is even taking into account old Mother Thatcher's government and the Labour government of the 1970s. Secondly, I would like to put it on record, because it was mentioned earlier on by the leader of the council.
So, is this a question or a statement, Councillor Nightingale?
It's coming.
Can you please be brief?
Would you agree with me that even before 2015, the age of austerity should have ended? And would you agree with me that this is the worst government we've ever had in my lifetime, and maybe his?
I thank Councillor Nightingale for giving me the opportunity to give my two-page speech that I didn't earlier. I agree with you on both points. One of the points that I was going to raise in my introduction, which I cut short myself due at the time, was the fact that, as Councillor Jeffries mentioned earlier on, this council over the last 4 years, and even beyond that, has had to do things for itself because we don't get any help from elsewhere. And I think that's the real plus point of our capital programme. We're investing in the borough. We're trying to make a difference because we recognise that government is not investing in our borough. Government's cut 4 million of our revenue grant this year, cut 4 million last year. It's been doing it for 9 years. No one shouts about it. We should far more. And obviously the big elephant in the room is the fact that this council in this area has always done well from the European Union. We've always had European funding, and as you'll see in the appendix of the report, we have no idea what this shared block is going to be from government, and there's a suggestion that it will be done on basis of an open competition as opposed to the needs of an area. That would be a tragedy for an area like Redcar and Cleveland, because we've always done well because of our need statistics. It should not be an open competition where rich boroughs get the same as a borough like ours that needs the investment. So I agree on both points. Even though I'm younger, I agree, even with your statement.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, please.
My question relates to the Amber, not a lady, the Amber performance on page 35, 126 target. Now, what we're asking here is to improve our asset management for two reasons. One, to drive down costs, and we've just heard about why that is helpful, but also to improve and reduce our carbon footprint. Equally, perhaps, having heard the previous debate, and possibly more important, but we're only achieving an Amber rating. So my question is, what in the limited time that the portfolio has left in service in his current position is he going to do about it to expedite the work that's needed to get this into a green, too much of a pun, position?
I think I highlighted earlier on a previous report that we as a council have a good track record of reducing our carbon emissions, but we need to make sure that we know exactly what's in our estate and how we can do that further. I think it's not directly relevant to that particular point, but it's directly relevant to the carbon footprint of the council and the borough, is that we'll be bringing forward a report to the next cabinet meeting, so in April before May, which looks to attach the council to the RE100 status, which is another one of the actions in the appendix. So we are mindful of these carbon emissions. We're also mindful of the fact that our asset strategy needs to be clearer. And I think both those points are well made, and the things that we will be looking into in the next month or two, not necessarily in a year, 2, 3 years' time. They're on the radar now.
Thank you, Councillor Massey. Now move on. We have about 7 minutes left. To item 10, we have no further motions. We have no recommendations to appoint members to other bodies. We move on to item 12, questions from members. The first question is from Councillor Thompson to Councillor Pallister. Is there anyone that can answer on Councillor Pallister's behalf? Okay, Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can we take the question as read?
Most of our borough is in a smoke control area, which means you can only burn authorised fuels and not wood generally. However, if you install a stove that DEFRA has successfully tested, then you can burn exempt fuels. Basically, this applies to hundreds and hundreds of stoves, hundreds of different sorts. If you go onto the DEFRA website, there's lists and lists and lists and lists of these stoves. So that's the situation. So you can, if you've got an exempt stove, which is quite likely, burn the fuel. How are we measuring those? Well, it's not possible for us to investigate complaints of odour from domestic properties. However, the building control section does hold information detailing which individual properties within the borough have been notified to have exempt appliances installed, and the Air Quality England provides details on air quality captured from our monitoring station in the borough. We monitor for something called PM10, which is particulate matter 10. This is used as an indicator for PM 2.5, which is the emission associated with the use of wood burners. And our PM10 levels show that there's no current need to carry out monitoring for PM 2.5 because we don't exceed the government limits. We're actively monitoring, however, and continue to actively monitor pollutant emissions for PM10 within the borough.
Thank you. Do you have a supplementary question, Councillor Thompson?
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the reply. I would just briefly say, Mr. Mayor, that the PM10 levels, although we're not exceeding them or even appearing to infringe upon the minimum, the difficulty that residents have is in their experience where they are experiencing pollution both visually and from a breathing point of view, they need to have some sort of guidance. You've mentioned a whole list of websites. Okay. So my supplementary attempts to address awareness and what we can do, recognizing that our powers of enforcement are limited. So the question supplementary, Mr. Mayor, is will the council do all that it is able to do through its extensive communications network to advise residents of the current legislation appertaining to legitimate use of fuel in wood burning and multi-fuel stoves, and suggest guidelines for residents to legitimately address such situations where the legislation guidelines are not followed?
I'm not sure that we can suggest guidelines out with what national government provides. There was a new clean air strategy published on the 14th of January this year. That is going to that is proposing that new powers will be given to local authorities in the future to take action in areas of high pollution, although we don't know the timeline for these new powers and what the details of them might be. But I think we probably need to understand that before we start talking about applying new levels or standards. I think your point about promotion of existing levels and what people should and shouldn't be doing is a good one. We do already produce a leaflet, but if there's more that we can do, I'm sure we could put something in the magazine or something like that. And I think just in terms of the whole issue about air quality, we are in the moment working with Middlesbrough Council looking at air quality across the whole South Tees area, and there was recently a workshop just looking at that, and the things that we're looking at is public health impacts on air pollution, local air quality, actions we can take, how we can work together with partners to improve air quality, and what are the barriers to implementation. So there's some good work going on, but certainly the point about publicity will pick up.
Right. Question 2, Councillor Thompson again, please.
My second question, Mr Mayor, can I take it as read?
Councillor Norton, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I have a detailed response which I'm quite content to leave with you before I go out of the chamber this evening. But just to say that in relation to cold calling, there is indeed a scheme operated by this local authority in terms of assisting those people who want to deter those who call at their properties. However, it is not totally under the control of this authority. There is, under the House-to-House Collections Act of 1939, a list of national exemption holders for door-to-door collections who do not then require a licence from this authority, but we ask them to let the authority know what's going on so that we can avoid, as it were, more than one or two of these people turning up on your street. So that, you know, there's 46 of those, and they're out with our control. We do have a very proactive scheme, and it's run by the Trading Standards Office, and those of us that have been out campaigning over the years will see these often on the doors, you know, go away, and all sorts of things that they ask us to do. The information in relation to that is available, you know, through areas such as our libraries, CAB, and of course our social workers encourage people to adopt that scheme wherever they can. And I think it boils down to whether you knock on the door to the value of the individual that's knocking on the door. He either respects the notice and goes away, or he doesn't and he continues to knock and perhaps disturbs the people that just don't want this cold calling. I'm happy to leave a longer response to that question rather than drag on for the next 3 or 4 minutes telling you all about it, which I'm sure, Councillor Thompson, if I know you well enough, you will know it better than I.
Thank you, Councillor Norton. Do you have a supplementary question?
Councillor
Bearing in
Thompson.
mind we have about a minute left.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do. All of that information we know is in the public domain. The question is, how can that be better communicated to residents who are vulnerable and who frequently approach us to say, what can we be doing? So my supplementary is simple. Will the council do all that it is able to do through its extensive communication network to advise residents of the current legislation appertaining to cold calling and suggest guidelines for addressing such situations when they occur?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm content to do that for Councillor Thompson in this matter, and I'll speak to officers to see what the current method of communication is, and I'm sure that we can find ways to improve it and ensure that the information gets to them.
Okay. Councillor Wilson, can we call you in very quickly, please?
Sorry?
Can we call you in very quickly to ask your question?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The Mosque Resident Group have met several times over many months with councillors, officers and other agencies, held their last formal meeting in September 2018. The leader and cabinet member for economic growth agreed in an exchange of emails their support for the outcomes and intent. Would the leader again confirm the continued support of her administration to the arrangement arrived at in September 2018?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very pleased to say that I am happy to confirm that position, yes. We have been working with the Basque Traffic Light Group, colleagues of whom have sat very patiently through all this meeting, waiting for this question to be asked. And, you know, all I can say is that I'm very happy to do that. And as much as I will have any control over the next administration, I will ensure that this position statement that we negotiated between us, and Councillor Norton was very clear about helping to do that, that should go ahead. So definitely yes.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Do you have a supplementary question? Okay. Thank you all very much. I declare the meeting closed.